All right, so hopefully they will join us again in a minute. I will send them apologies emails. Hey, there is someone else in lobby 42. Nadine, is there anyone over there? Okay. Natine is the person's name. Natine, N-I-T-I-N. Let me know if anyone starts rejoining the VC. When all that cool social networking technology doesn't work, you have to fall back to instant messaging, right?
Hey, Eric.
Hey, sorry about that.
Hey, no problem. I'm back. I told the other guys that you switched to in different Hangouts, so they should be back here shortly.
Yep.
There's one.
Cool. Hopefully you guys were able to hear part of the video that was playing there. If the Google Hangout technology worked as advertised.
Well, it actually, I'm not sure what happened, but right when you were facing the camera and you said, okay, I'm going to try this, cross your fingers, that's when the audio cut out. So no, I don't think I'm not sure what you did, but so no, we didn't catch any of the video, I don't think.
Okay, well, it worked for us here. Basically, I was walking through a quick version of the Account Chooser workgroup video, and if you guys wanted to try it yourself, not even sure you can do this probably with everything else. You can just go to the home page of the Account Chooser working group, and right there at the top is a video that you could play yourself and listen to. So you don't need to do it now. And we'll be going through some pointers to it, but that was sort of the highlights. Now, what I would suggest those of you guys on the video do is on the AccountChooser.com working group, there is under the video the third link is labeled Slide Deck Overview. And if you open that and sort of jump through the different slides, you'll be able to see screenshots of the video. So you can use that for reference, and I'll probably use something similar here. One of the key things that, of those of you who have seen Account Chooser before that's a bit different, is we now have the ability to, instead of picking a dedicated page to show the Account Chooser and forcing the user to click a button to redirect to it, we now have the ability to on one page mix both the Account Chooser list and content from the website together. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that's done. So now let me switch over to the agenda here. And the next person that I want to introduce is a Google employee by the name of Jasbir, who, Jasbir, you can want to stand up and sort of walk this way, like so they can see your face. You and I will be the other teachers. I'm sure you did your homework ahead of time and read the agenda and saw that you were in second bullet, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yes, I did his homework. So Jasbir is an engineering lead on a project called Kaha that's been around 3.5 years, 4 years at this point. Kaha is using a number of different frameworks. Its general idea, and Jazz, you'll have to correct me if I get this wrong, is to sanitize HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make sure that it is securing, if you're doing evil things like piggybacking or phoning home information. And so what this latest version of Central Account Chooser supports as an optional feature is the ability for websites to say, hey, I want to redirect a user to the Central Account Chooser to pick an account. But hey, I also want the Central Account Chooser to show these 3 pieces of HTML. One is a header, one is a footer, and one is just marketing text on the side. Those are just passed as pointers to HTML files. The Central Account Chooser sees those 3 HTML files, runs them through some Kaha JavaScript that sanitizes that information, and then mixes the end result in a page that is running on the domain of the Central Account Chooser, but to the end user actually looks like it's marketing, basically looks like users on the home page of the other sites. Now, an interesting analogy of this to look at is try at some point logging out of Google, if you do log into Google, and go and visit a Google-owned service that doesn't use the Google brand, like Blogger or Orkut, or go to YouTube and click sign in. If you do so, you'll notice that you are, and the Yahoo guys probably used to this, you're redirected to a central login page that one team at Google maintains and has a login box on one side, and the rest of it is marketing information provided by services. So the idea of mixing these two together is a common pattern of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Yahoo, etc. It doesn't tend to surprise users. They don't notice that the URL is different. They look at the marketing, which is why phishing works so well. But that's one of the more advanced techniques that we're now starting to use as part of the central account chooser. So just, while we have Doug here, and let's see, most of that side of the room, the Google people, and then the team. Did you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Sorry, I'm late. My name is Nitin, and I work for Motorola City, and I am person of the village education
And then in fact, sorry,
the UX designers, general of Google Hangouts and others.
Cool. So I wanted to start going. The account chooser, this use of Kaha is just a new feature that we haven't shown before. So many of y'all, and we're not that large a group, only like 10 non-Googlers for this. Many of y'all are already familiar with most of what the account chooser does. This is a difference. It's not a required feature. Websites could still use the account chooser just as a redirect where all that's done is it shows the account list and picks from it. But I want to see Yahoo folks, Amy, Pam, if you all have questions about that, especially with Jazz here, or if anyone online does. So let me start with the room. Especially, Hugo, you, Amy, Pam, any questions about that? Or seem obvious how it works?
So it says, I'm not that familiar with Kaha, but is there an actual authentication process for the website?
So, is it worthwhile running through showing what the whole thing looks like? I mean,
so what would you like me to do, and what do you want the people at their homes to do?
So I was going to suggest running through the AC test site.
Okay.
Just generate one
so use the testing tool. Do you want to explain this before I click the button, or?
Sure. Okay.
And the people on phone?
Yep. So those of you who are remote, you won't be able to see what I'm looking at the screen without us being able to video it to you. But what we did is we went to the account chooser working group site, and there's a link there for testing tool. If you click on it, you'll see one of these geeky pages with lots of boxes to check and field names. And Jazz is going to explain what is on there.
I'm going to explain just the Kaha pieces. Sure. So the particular pieces that you are interested in is the header URL, the main URL, and the footer. Actually, Eric, can you just select?
Sure. So those of you remote, we're going to just click the button.
And what has happened here is most of the page is a template page. It's the standard template page. The content that is rendered here, and I believe as part of the footer and header, is third-party marketing. I mean, it's third-party content specific to the site that is embedding the login box. The set of things that as a security person I worry about, and the set of things that you will worry about as well, is well, if I'm creating this marketing text, that marketing text might contain errors. It might be vulnerable to XSS attacks. I want to make sure that whatever happens, the contents that I end up placing in these places don't attack my users. And the other thing that you would nevertheless want to be able to do is you want to make sure that this is your welcome to your customers. You want to make sure that it's as styled as possible. It is as appropriate to your users as possible. And so the trade-off that we are able to make here is these three pieces get sanitized either as arbitrary HTML and CSS or as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, there's a slight the Kaha project takes the content that you point at for these three places, sanitizes it, makes sure that it is resilient against XSS, and renders the That's all that's really happening. Now, there might be places where you need extra JavaScript in order to run. In order to execute that, we end up having to sandbox the JavaScript so that it is able to access only that content which you have placed, in a little box. The way to think about this is it's a virtual iframe, but it loads much quicker. It's rendered in line. You're able to do whatever else you want. Okay, that's basic production. If there are any questions.
So if you were an attacker and you wanted to phish the site, you could theoretically take that logo, that text, and that JavaScript, create something called ac-test-phish.appspot.com, put it in, and the user would never be, other than that little bit in the address bar, they wouldn't have any of this.
That's absolutely the case, right? So this is not addressing the phishing problem. What this is addressing is when from a legitimate site, a user is redirected to the login page, that page is not able to attack. And in most cases, the users won't type in, presumably, the account user site, right? Because if they go to the account user site directly, account user does not have any way of knowing which site's branding material it should be showing. When you redirect from a particular site, then all of that information is relayed. I believe in the fragment. Is that how it's going to be? How is a particular account able to decide which pieces of content to show?
Or you can go back anything has.
No. Yes, so this will generate the particular template page. I agree with that. How does so this is the API that is used by the embedding site. Okay.
We know it does not code.
So behind you, the source code, it generates to then start the flow. And let me do just a quick question to those of you who are on the video now. Can you all see the screen that we're presenting?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I clicked on your video, and it, yep,
okay.
I can see it very well.
Cool. All right. Still new to Google Hangouts, but it's fun. All right. Great. So I think Jazz has answered questions here in the room. Is there anyone who remotely has any questions for Jazz about how Kaha and the central account user are working together?
So let me just make sure I have it correct. The idea behind using Kaha to run the JavaScript and the web and the HTML in a sandbox is to protect the user from having the information about what IDPs they're using be surreptitiously harvested by a relying party, or have the relying party put some sort of malicious overlay on top of the various checkboxes.
So so the question was, does Kaha prevent the from?
He was asking if that's the value proposition.
Oh, that is certainly part of the value proposition. Yes, it does prevent. It does prevent the marketing marketing content from taking over the rest of the page, redirecting the user.
Or just I don't. It could, if it was really evil, it could just grab the whole account list.
That's correct. Yes.
Right. So that would be the main concern I would have of normally allowing a third party to put JavaScript on the site, is that they're going to come up with a way to extract what the user's accounts are, which is not a good privacy thing. Not necessarily the end of the world, but certainly not a good privacy thing. So using Kaha to isolate, allow RP elements on the page whilst still protecting the user's privacy is, in general, a good thing.
Yes. So I mean, I tend not to. I mean, there's a sort of large list of attacks that are possible. Instead of worrying about all of the attacks that are possible, I tend to only open up exactly the set of APIs that allow the marketing page to do exactly what it needs and nothing more than that. And in this particular case, that ability is nothing other than to render HTML and CSS in that div and to use JavaScript to access those components that they just rendered.
So one Kaha question is whether or not there are browser dependencies. I'm assuming that this works really well in Chrome, perhaps not so good on IE5. Are there additional limitations to the browser, or or there's enough requirements in doing account chooser that the features required for account chooser and Kaha completely overlap?
Okay, so the question is, what browser requirements do we have? The version of Kaha that I think that account chooser ought to go with is the version of Kaha that depends on strict mode, and that is limited to Chrome, Firefox, and modern versions. So Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and modern versions of IE. So old versions of IE are a problem, but they are only a problem if you are wanting to execute JavaScript. If you want to sanitize, HTML and HTML and CSS, the version of Kaha here will handle that just fine. So what you'll get is, on newer browsers, any JavaScript that you end up on the page works, but HTML and CSS works in either case.
So there'd have to be a fallback for people that have older whack browsers on their mobile devices.
Correct. I mean, and the fallback is, active content on your page does not run.
Right. Cool. Okay.
Actually, I do have a question. So if people know whether or not marketing text would often include JavaScript, that would be a useful thing for me to know.
Yeah.
Again?
Some marketing guys even love Flash, right? So I think what we in Google is our Google's login team doesn't trust our own coworkers in our marketing departments to create the login templates for, say, the Blogger homepage. So we constrain even them, what we do, and there's constant fights back and forth. Here, at least, I think that we have the advantage. We can tell websites, you know what? If you don't like the constraints, don't show the account chooser merge on your homepage. Show a sign-in button, and when people click the sign-in button, then do a redirect. So, for example, if you go to YouTube today, you notice it doesn't have a password field on it. There's a sign-in thing. If you click that, then you are asked to enter your Google email address and password. They made that decision because they're using Flash to show videos on the homepage, by default. Cool. Okay, thanks, Jazz. All right, so let me move on to then the next piece was that AC test site. So go ahead, Ben, do you want to come up for a minute? So this AC test link that's both off the working group site and the agenda is an interesting one for us techie geekies to play with. So why don't you look there just so they can see your face once? Oh, go bend down and look at the blue dot. Okay, this is going good. Great. So this is a good idea to get a feel for all of the inputs that the current central account chooser takes. And we're going to continue to, and actually you have to use this one to move it around. So if you want, you can walk around here and show it. But there are, I guess right now there are the three main services are in the top left, it shows the word select, and underneath it has two blue hyperlinks, store and update. Those are the only three main features of the central account chooser. The select is the user selects an account, and then it gets returned to the site. The store is if a site wants to try to add one, and the update is if a site wants to update the information for you there. Ben, do you want to go into more details on then what the others are?
Yeah, actually, this is a test tool for the central account chooser. Actually, they support the three services currently. With very simple JavaScript code, a site can trigger this service. A service actually is a UI flow that hosts on the central CDS domain. So let's say the select service first. Actually, below is the sample JavaScript code. You can see it is quite simple. Just collect the input. Then actually, with a quite simple API, we can trigger the select service. So the UI will redirect to the central domain, and the select flow will start.
Can you scroll up a minute again, go again to the top of the page?
Top of the page, okay.
Yep, top of this page. I wanted to mention, so there's one feature here you notice up at the top that says include below local accounts. So this is a relatively advanced feature that most sites probably will not do to start. A site could choose to keep both its own list of accounts in its domain and its cookie and its storage of accounts it's seen before, as well as rely on the central account chooser to keep the list. The reasons for doing that are a little bit advanced. I'm not even sure we'll have time to get to it today. I doubt most sites will do this. I think it's a pretty sophisticated action. And so if you simply unclick that and then look at the JavaScript again, can you unclick that one and then show
actually
the JavaScript gets even smaller?
The JavaScript cannot dynamically change it. Actually, if you uncheck this, I mean this part will.
Can you send someone over to lobby for one more pickup?
This part will not include into the JavaScript code.
So how does the blind party know which accounts push into the account user?
There are a couple of examples. I probably shouldn't spend too much on that. One is, it is a website that was not yet using the central account user and was only using its own local account user. So I think some of you know that Google has been experimenting for quite a while with a local account user that we store. When we are ready to instead redirect users to the central account user, we'd like to take the existing entries we have and shove them up there.
But how do you know which entries or which user has authenticated?
They're just claims. They're not validated entries. So it's just, it's locally, like say if you had been logging into Google as Frank at Gmail and Tom at Gmail, and Google had never used the central account user. But over here, these other few sites have been using the central account user, and both Frank and Tom were there. Google wouldn't yet know that fact. So the first time that we, as Google, redirect to the central account user, we could tell the central account user, hey, we got these two accounts. Can you merge those with the list you already have and show a merged list? Have the user pick one and come back. If the central account user merges through and says, oh, well, they're all duplicates, nothing happens. But if Google had one that wasn't already up there, then it combined those information.
So you know which users go with which browser by like either set and left?
Right. Yeah. So like I say, relatively advanced feature. And so did you show the JavaScript that removed?
Yeah.
So that, it's pretty darn small. Gets even smaller. And to be honest, if you take out all the Kaha stuff or the customized marketing text, it gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah. This is the Kaha part. Right?
Yeah. Now I think I wanted you to stay up for a moment for the next one, then. So the next item in the agenda was then the technical. Actually, you got to stay up. The technical overview of how it works. So I will attempt to describe this, Goibin, as the less technical person, and Goibin could tell me where I'm lying. So one of the frequent questions that I explain to people is, okay, how does the communication work between a website and CDS and back? Just how does the information get back and forth? Well, one of our design goals here is to do this in such a way where the server of the central account user doesn't need to be involved. We want all of the code and logic running in the user's browser for privacy reasons, security reasons, etc. So we didn't want to do things like URL redirects with all the information in the URL, because then we need a server to capture that post and then reflect it up to logic in the page. So instead, what we do is, darn, I turned off your page. What this JavaScript that we're showing actually does is, hey Greg, this is Greg Keystra from Generating Threads. When a user is on a site and that site decides to start integrating with central account user, it doesn't immediately redirect to the central account user. Instead, what it does is it loads a hidden iframe to that central account user and says, I want to give you a bunch of equivalent of URL parameters to store on my behalf. So here are the accounts I've seen before, here's the language I want used, here's the marketing text I want to use, all that type of stuff communicates in this hidden iframe. And then, I can't remember, it gets back like an instance identifier, or I guess or it just uses the domain name as a key.
Yeah, domain name.
The domain name is key.
Yeah.
So it does all that. Then it does a redirect to the site. And you notice in the redirect there is a hash fragment, which includes the domain of the site that started the flow. Well, at that point, the central account user goes and says, well, let me see what information I recently was asked to store by that site. Oh, well, I was asked to do a select function. I was asked to do it in German. I was asked to do it with this marketing text. It then renders the entire page. When the user chooses an account, it clicks one, it just does all it does at this point is a redirect back to that original site. And the site is then required to once again load an iframe to the central account user and say, hey, this site again. And now it is able to read out what account the user selected, name, email address, identity provider, etc. Am I technically accurate there?
Yeah.
So that is the short description of how it works, and like I say, how we're doing it just purely with JavaScript on the client side.
Yeah, also, we select the pop-up mode.
Right.
Because, in pop-up mode, we don't save the request and the response into local storage. Just use close domain HTML5 post message to communication between the pop-up and the parent window.
Yep.
Yeah.
So people were, one of the things John Bradley asked about before with Caja is, what are we going to do with browsers that don't support all the Caja features? Well, there, fortunately, guys had a good answer, which is, well, it works with quite a lot of browsers, at least with sanitizing HTML and CSS. Here, though, we are relying on some modern browser features so that we don't need any server-side component for the privacy features that we were describing. The same user experience could be built with URL redirects and a little bit of server-side infrastructure, but people might be reasonably concerned about the privacy properties of that. So at least Google's suggestion, but up to the workgroup side, is to start with this version that only works on modern browsers. And if a website realizes, the user's on an older browser, well, don't try to use the central account user. Just fall back to its traditional login. So I wanted to stop here at this point while Ben is up, and again, see if there are questions in the room for him about the how does it work piece, especially the communication part, and then we'll see if anyone on the video has questions. So, Greg, I'm sure now that you just walked in, you have lots of questions. But Amy, Hugo, you or Pam, any questions from you guys? Yeah, I did
Yeah, I thought you earlier.
Okay, we have tons of time. And I see Nat just joined us. But so Nat, Jason, John, George, those of you on VC, do any of you have questions for Goy Ben on the how it works part?
Not yet. I mean, just that one thing I ran into the other night testing, though. I think it was in the agenda further on. So.
Okay, cool. All right, let me see what is next in the agenda. I guess I'm supposed to sit down, but yes, okay. Now I have to talk. All right, so now we get into an interesting...
Just to ask a question of the cross-covering aspect. Well, having three different browsers going at the same time.
Right.
So the automatic is there where you can something like the WebSockets to eliminate
you can, these guys can answer technically, but you can have two browsers on the same computer going to the same site for the central account user with different lists of accounts, and it just works. It's all, charted off by browser, by the native way the JavaScript information all by storage. Cool? Yeah. All right. So the next thing that I want to talk about is not as much technical, but operational. If you play with all the demos, you'll notice they are currently running on the domain accountchooser.biz, B-I-Z, and they're running in SSL mode. As you could imagine, to make this simpler when we formally launch it, we prefer to run it on accountchooser.com, but be in SSL mode. However, the reason we haven't actually launched that is I don't want Google or Eric Sachs or Goy Ben to launch accountchooser.com and to have, for example, seen the SSL certificate that is used, and for people to fear that we might have done something bad with it, right? There's also a question, how do we operate the site? The site itself is very small. So let me bring up, for example, the account chooser.biz site, and I want to just do a view source here in a moment. View source. Okay, so this is the entire HTML of the site. Scrolling up and down, it is 1.5 pages of HTML. That's the entire website. There are actually 5 files that are all this size. One is for selecting account, one for update, one for so the HTML files on the site are all static, meaning the only thing we need to serve this up is a infrastructure that can serve static HTML files over SSL with good performance, latency, availability, etc. Right? There are lots of ways to do that. However, doing it over SSL immediately provides some interesting challenges. For those of you who deal with operational issues, you may know IP addresses are a little hard to come by these days. And if you want a unique SSL address, you need a unique IP address. It gets even worse if you want that IP address to be performant across multiple data centers around the world. You end up having to do much more complex things. So even within a company as big as Google, for example, it is quite difficult for teams to say, I want a new unique domain name that is SSL enabled that will perform well across the entire world. Right? So we run into that challenge. So we've been trying to figure out, okay, how can the OpenID Foundation, who, for example, is not as large as Google, it doesn't have lots of networking address rings around, how can the OpenID Foundation run this site in a way where it's over SSL, it's secure, and the site is operated in such a way where all of us, who sometimes are competitors with each other, can be confident that none of us are going to go and muck with the HTML or take the SSL certificate and do something evil with it. I don't expect to resolve that here. That is one of the things that I want to have discussed on the working group to figure out, governance-wise, what is a reasonable way to quote-unquote launch this. Even though it completely operates functionally in a country like this, how do we launch it in a way where this group of peers from different companies feels that it's being operated safely? Now, I've been looking at this for a while and asking different groups of people for advice. Let me split it into 2 pieces. The first piece is, who is going to have access to the DNS registration records for this domain and can, for example, change it, point it somewhere else, and can get the SSL certificate? Well, nicely there, the OpenID Foundation uses this company called Adventures, who on behalf of a lot of technical alliances provides a lot of back office functions. One of those functions is managing their DNS systems so that companies who compete with each other trust that there's a neutral group maintaining this stuff. So we actually know IDF already has an organization who operates that way. And for example, I've interacted with them, and if you tell them to go and add a new domain or change a DNS record, they don't do it unless the executive director of the OpenID Foundation says that it's allowed or says that you're authorized to perform some actions. So there's immediately a sort of security operational check that is performed. So let's assume that part of the job is eventually. And then the next thing that we need is a place to host 5 HTML files over SSL securely. So how many people are familiar with a standard called SNI? Come on, at least in Google should know. Okay. Let's see some hand raises for video. How many people know what SNI is on the video? All right, John Bradley. Oh, okay, so I have to by Jason. So those guys, those are the advanced guys. You guys are the big guys. All right. So SNI is a standard that some browsers support, where when an SSL socket is open, instead of opening it to a particular IP address, you open it and you pass into the IP address the domain name that you want to access. Now, that wasn't how SSL was designed originally. Originally with SSL, you took a domain name, you did a DNS lookup, found the IP address, and you opened up an SSL socket to it. And the first thing you would expect back is the name of domain at that input. And if the two didn't match, you would error out. One of the problems that created is you cannot operate multiple SSL domains on the same IP address or separate IP addresses. It's highly limited. So a couple of years, a standard was created called SNI to change the way that browsers did SSL, where they would still do the DNS lookup, but when they open that socket connection, they would, as part of it, have to say, here is the domain I am trying to access.
For the acronym challenged, SNI is server name indication, as I recall.
Yes, that is correct. So accountchooser.biz right now is actually running in that mode. It is running on an IP address shared by a whole bunch of other applications. And if you tried to access it with a older browser, like on Windows 98, if you type www.accountchooser.biz, you would actually get an SSL certificate. On more modern browsers and operating systems, it works just fine for those of you who have played with it or seen how it's operating here. So it is currently Google's suggestion, but again, open to people's device, that we operate the central account user in this mode where it only supports browsers that support this SNI specification. The primary browsers that leaves out are actually not browsers, but operating systems. It ends up any operating system before Windows 7 does not support SNI with any flavor of Internet Explorer or Safari. So on those older versions of Windows, unless you have Chrome or Firefox, you would get these SSL certificate warnings. If you're on more modern versions of Windows, you're fine. If you're on Mac, Linux, most mobile devices, you are fine. Now, one of the reasons we feel that we can get away with this is it is highly unusual for a user to directly type www.accountchooser.biz in their browser. Instead, what they do is they go to a website where they click a sign-in button, or they go to a website where, as I showed in the demos, it automatically redirects to the central account chooser. But that means that that site, before it does the redirect, can look at the user's browser, can look at the user's operating system and says, oh, this is a browser that cannot support SNI, or doesn't support the HTML5 features you want, or doesn't support the Kaha features you want. And in that case, it could act as if the central account chooser is empty, which would basically equate to the website shows its existing login page today. And it always needs to keep the ability to show its existing login page today, because if someone buys a new computer and just the first thing they go to is that website, well, there are no accounts on the machine, so it has to have some fallback. So the code that we've written so far actually does, and before making things work right, it does start to perform that check where the website looks at the user's browser and OS, and only if we believe it supports necessary features does it talk to accountchooser.biz. Otherwise, it just falls back to its own site or potentially a local account. Is that right?
So there is, of course, the possibility that we could have two account chooser domains, one that was a fallback for older browsers and another that used SNI for those that support it.
Correct. And the fallback one would probably be in one data center in one country, and therefore wouldn't be as reliable or redundant. But it would be it could be a reasonable fallback.
Hey, if they're using XP, reliability is not really one of their big concerns.
Yes, I think that is a reasonable standpoint. So like I said, the first issue was operational, who managed the SSL certificate. The second is how to scale the SSI performance. That's the SNI component. The third thing is, okay, well, given 1 and 2, where the heck should we actually host these few HTML files? We want it to be a place that is, very reliable, secure, high uptime, and as you can imagine that as this grows, it is going to get a significant amount of traffic if it is all popular. And if large websites like Google for their login system are relying on it, we're going to care a lot about uptime and reliability. We also want a system where again, more of a platform as a service as opposed to infrastructure as a service, so you're not having downtime to update operating systems, etc. So when we looked at this from a Google perspective, we looked around and we said, okay, well, actually Google App Engine is a reasonable solution to this. But of course, we're Google, so maybe that's an obvious thing. But we are currently running accountchooser.biz as a Google App Engine app, where it has no server-side logic. It's just these 5 HTML files that sit on top of it, and it scales as necessary. However, we're very open to the idea of maybe it should be hosted somewhere else, on Azure, on Amazon Web Services, on some other system that would have the same properties of being able to scale up and down and have high reliability. App Engine does support this SNI standard right now. It's actually in a limited preview mode, so you have to be whitelisted to use it. but we got our application whitelisted. We can get other test ones listed. So I'm not going to pretend to be the key operational expert in this area, so I didn't know if people in this group have any immediate thoughts. We're happy to hear thoughts over the next few weeks of, are there good places other than App Engine where we could run this, with SSL, but with, high confidence of scaling and operational issues?
So we could support multiple layers of redundancy. It is possible to do DNS round robin on top of a distributed, BGP peering sort of distribution network. So we could select both App Engine, Azure, and some Amazon or other cloud service and actually round robin the DNS if that was supported. There's no reason that we necessarily have to select just one.
Yep, I would agree. Hey, like Mark in the back and Naveen, can you guys hear him pretty well? I couldn't, if you wanted to, I could try to plug in the overhead mic and see how that works. Do you want me to try, or is that a dangerous thing to try? Okay. Okay, it's getting a little loud. Hey, John, can you try talking again so we can see how loud you are here?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, a little bit of echo, but otherwise that seems good. Do you want him to repeat that statement, Mark? Yeah. Sure. Yes. So, John, could you repeat the statement about the round robining?
My point was that we can have multiple layers of load balancing DNS round robining or some other DNS load balancing mechanism on top of a hosting load balanced solution where that relies on BGP for shortest path routing. That would enable us to select both App Engine, Azure, Amazon, and or other appropriate people that want to participate in the hosting. It makes the administration slightly more complicated, but may distribute the load more evenly.
Cool. So there's another thing I want to point out. If y'all look at the screen of the HTML file of AccountUser.biz, I've currently highlighted one line with the words Identity Toolkit. So I pointed out that the HTML file of this site is very small, a page and a half. So one of the questions is, okay, well, where's the hell the logic written? So we added another level of abstraction here where this HTML file, about the only thing it does is it loads a JavaScript file from somewhere else. Now, fortunately, the JavaScript file it loads from somewhere else can be on any SSL domain we want. So in this case, we are loading it from something Google calls the AJAX loader, which is this system which does have multiple IP addresses around the world, really well load balanced. It's basically a caching framework where, for example, publicly Google hosts a cached copy of jQuery that can be loaded up extremely quickly, as well as other popular AJAX libraries. So we have taken a copy of the JavaScript that we've written for the central account user. We have given it to that team at Google and said, please host a copy of it just like you host a copy of jQuery. And so when the HTML file loads up, the first thing it does is load from there. So there's actually sort of these two backend components. There's the HTML files we have to put someplace, and those have to run under the SSL certificate of www.accountuser.com, whereas the JavaScript files could run anywhere. And so John probably just stole my round robining point as to point out that today we have it loading it just from this one location on Google. There's nothing keeping us from modifying the HTML to say 50% of the time load it from Google, 30% of the time load it from over here, load it from over here. So we could put the same JavaScript file in multiple locations. We could even allow websites to say, hey, I would like the JavaScript file to be loaded that is, hosted by vendor 3 here. We could do, that type of stuff so that people are, again, are comfortable that each component is actually handled securely. And this particular JavaScript file, and Naveen, now tell me if I lie or anyone else in the room, that JavaScript file should be something that anyone can create by taking the open source code of the central account user, which is right now in a Google code repository. If they just create that JavaScript, they should get exactly that same JavaScript file. So another thing people can do is monitor this HTML file to see if it ever changes, monitor the JavaScript file that is loaded from here to ever see if it changes. So we can honestly watch each other's backs and make sure no one is mucking with the underlying system. Does that make sense? Okay. So by the way, so the next steps on this one, I want to write up some notes on this and send it to the mailing group site. I would like to get www.countries.com launched as quickly as possible. My initial plan, and I'm going to send out to the group for approval, is to use App Engine just as we're using today with SNI, because as John Bradley pointed out, we can do round robin or we can change where the DNS points in the future. However, then what I'm going to ask inventors to do is we are going to allow them to manage the SSL certificate. There's a nice ability with App Engine that one administrator over here uploads the certificate, and once it's uploaded, other than some people in a different part of Google, I don't even know where they are, theoretically no one can see that once it's uploaded. It'd be a serious violation of Google's internal policies if anyone did, certainly none of us can. So I'm going to have the person from Inventors upload that SSL certificate after that's created, and she will then be able to administratively give the rights to our App Engine app to use that SSL certificate. And if any of you guys want to sort of see how that process works, again, it's a standard feature of App Engine, so I'd be more than happy to point you to it so you can look at it and feel like we have a reasonable separation of duties. So that's all I'm going to suggest we start. That won't happen for at least a week or two, so I'll put that proposal in the mail for people to suggest alternatives. John? So
I imagine what you really mean is the private key.
Sorry. Thank you. You're right.
So essentially, inventors would escrow the private key so that we could, in fact, move this to a different service. Although you can always cut another certificate with the same host, so that's not necessarily a big deal.
Yep, and right now, they as inventors are the only ones who can cut SSL certificates for that domain because they control the domain records for it.
We hope.
Yeah, we hope. All right. So now let me go on to, okay. So the next thing in the agenda for those of you on the VC, though hopefully you can see it, is feedback on UX refinements. So Google has been using the account chooser, again, since last July. One of our most interesting data points, if you guys hadn't heard me tell this story, is we decided within Google, where back in last July, we had somewhere around 20,000 full or part-time employees. We decided to just turn on the account chooser for every single person in the company with zero warning, zero explanation, no explanation, just turn it on so they would come in the next morning. And so we're having estimates of, okay, given 10,000 people, how many complaints will we get? Well, we get 1,000, we get 2,000, 100, etc. We turned it on, and we thought something was broken because in the first 24 hours we never heard a complaint. After 24 hours, we started to get people saying, "This is fantastic, when is it going to launch internally," type of thing. After 48 hours, we got our first complaint, and it was actually about features that they thought we should have done as improvements to this, but they found it as a bug and it didn't do what they wanted. That is honestly kind of like a sophisticated audience. It also tends to be an audience who, that the Googlers will tell you, complain a lot. No offense if my Facebook buddies were here, it doesn't include all the ex-Googlers who went to Facebook. It includes people who are a little bit more paranoid, I guess is the word, including some ex-paranoids from Yahoo. So that has performed extremely well. Also since then, we have continued to have people externally opt into it. We've been doing ongoing usability studies to try to figure out how well this works. And overall, the results have just been fantastic. Certainly exceeded anything we had ever hoped to achieve. An interesting thing to note that happened also in sort of July, August timeframe is we as Google launched this with the hope of making it easier to log into Google when Google was a relying party. We already as Google are a relying party to thousands of schools, businesses, etc. that run their own SAML login system. For some advanced users, program features are relying parties to Hotmail, Yahoo, AOL, etc. And for those people, we found that it was hard to log into Google. They had usability problems similar to the ones Yahoo reported to us when they became a relying party of Google. So we rolled this out to see would it solve all those problems. And yes, in fact, it did. The very interesting side effect that we found, though, was all the really the vast majority of positive feedback came from Gmail users of Google, who said, this is such a better login experience than what I already have. And we're like, what the hell is the difference? All it adds is your picture, you click it, you still have to type your password. Like, how much better could that be? But we actually found that something about the friendliness of people seeing their picture on login pages significantly increased the percentage of time in which they would be logged into sites. Right? Now, one of the most interesting examples of this for us is, it's been out long enough, we see this pattern where a user who has a Google account, like a Gmail address, will go to a Google service that is not branded as Google, but uses our same login page. This would be like the Yahoo user going to Flickr without realizing that Flickr is owned by Yahoo, or the Google user going to Blogger without realizing Blogger is owned by Google. In fact, if you look at Blogger's April Fool's joke a year ago, they put out a blog post that said, Blogger's been acquired by Google. And we actually bought them 8.5 years ago, and they can still reasonably make that joke. It's amazing how many people who use it do not realize that it's associated with Google. So historically, if you looked at our account creation flows, for example, on Blogger.com, we would see that about a third to a half of the people who try to create an account on Blogger.com, they're trying to create an account for a Google account that already existed, and get themselves tied into knots. Right? Now what we find is that same user, they go to Blogger.com, and immediately they see their picture. Immediately they see the account chooser with the marketing text on the rest of the page. And as you can imagine, the percentage of those people who finish and get through the sign-up process is much, much higher than what it was when it was this daunting sign in, sign up, lots of other stuff. In general, what we found is, people would go to blog and they'd like, crap, I got to sign up. They just wouldn't bother. They'd just go away. So many people are annoyed by that. But if they go there and see their picture, they just assume that the process will be more friendly to them, as they do when they see, say, a Facebook, Google, Yahoo login button on a site. But it's even more friendly, more personalized because it has their picture. So we find it drags more people into the site. Now, based on all of that analysis internally, external testing, our executives, up to our CEO, have said Google will deploy the account chooser to all of our users, where the federated login thing is a second priority. We are rolling it out with the target of people who log into Google with a password, because we believe that it will be so helpful to our user base, increasing sign-in and sign-up rates. The fact that it helps with federated login at Google's line party is a nice side effect. So when I've gone out and given presentations about this to lots of different companies over the past 6 months to garner feedback, I've heard the same thing time and time again from the Safeways of the world, right? The websites who aren't even sure they're ready yet to become relying parties, but are trying to figure out how do they bridge the gap from lots of people who are logging in with email addresses and passwords today to becoming a relying party. How do they do that without scaring users off, creating lots of help desk calls? And our key suggestion right now is use an account chooser as a stepping stone. So first deploy an account chooser on your site, keep your passwords. Once you've got that working, then go to Gmail, Giga, etc., and become a relying party. So what I wanted to show you guys right now is we've been continuing to iterate with users, with Google's account chooser, to see how well it works there. The primary thing that we have found as a problem, not a big problem, but honestly the only problem we find, is sometimes when people come to a website and it has their pictures on there and the marketing text, sometimes the people are like, that's great, I must already be signed in, right? Especially if there's only one picture. And so even though it says all around it, please click a button, please sign in, go here, some of the people just don't. Right now it appears to be about a 1 in 100 thing. And so based on that, what we decided to do is to try to add a training page where after the user first logs into Google, we would visually sort of indicate to them, hey, and now this is what this page is going to do. If we want to add your account to this computer, please add it. So the users just type their password to say access Gmail. In this page, they have no other option other than to click the add button. If they do, they're then taken to the site. Now, interestingly, while we wanted this for this 1% case to help educate people about how to sign in the future, it also is the functional equivalent of the add user page on the central account chooser. where a user has to consent to include an account. So what Google is planning on doing and suggesting to the working group, Google is going to add this to our flow. So as we roll out the account to our users, they will all first see this consent to add your account to the machine flow, and then when they come back, they will be able to select an account. We're going to do this to start just running on Google, just with a central account user. And then what we're going to do is percentage experiments, where 1, 10, and a growing percentage of users see this page, but hosted by the central account. And so we're just continuing to try to take the UI and the central account user and tweak it based on what we learned there and what we learned on Google back and forth. And so this is right now the best UI that a coworker of Chuck's has helped us create, called Adam Mercy. And then this is the UI for when a user comes back. When they hover over an account, they have to click the blue sign in button. So you notice up here, hover, go to an account and click add, and down here, hover over an account and click sign in. And so in both cases, we're training the user to click on the same place in the same box. Just one time it says add, one time it click sign in. So you might have noticed all the pictures here of Chuck. Chuck is this guy in the back who started working on this project a year and a couple months ago. So is there anything else about the changes in the UX, Chuck, compared with where we were a few months ago that you think are worth highlighting? Yeah, so it's funny, the country that does work better on mobile, because I think it's actually because we get rid of all that crappy marketing text, and all there is a full page. You must select the account. It looks like something people are used to on mobile devices.
Coming from a mobile company, as usual, things are
yeah, I think we still have.
offline.
Well, I think they're just one click away, because while we're on the topic. I think if you go to the working group homepage, or try it, by the way, try it on your mobile phone. It does work. Screenshot. So that's the screen for adding an account, and more interestingly, that's the screen for selecting an account. Or to make it more challenging, let me scroll down a bit. That's the screen for adding a second account. And that's the screen on the mobile device for choosing between accounts. Okay. Great. So, so those are the UX refinements that we as Google, based on our experimentation, have in mind. But to be honest, especially video generating, fame, etc., you guys deal with a larger Yahoo. You guys deal with a larger set of websites who are already relying parties. We primarily designed this UI based on feedback from existing relying parties about what help desk calls they got. So over the years, I think you guys know, Google has gone and just asked them and sat down with their people, made a list, merged them all together, and then just tried to work our way through to make sure we cover all of those and to get rid of them. A set of those are related to account linking questions. That's sort of a different task. But within the UX itself, you have sites, you have lots of different sites. Sorry, let me go back here for a moment. There are sites who are not relying parties and log people into passwords. There are sites who deal with passwords and identity providers. There are sites who deal with social identity providers, ones who deal with email providers, ones who deal with both, sites who deal with email providers, social identity providers, passwords, etc. We've tried to test against what we think is the hardest scenario, which where traditionally we actually use Yahoo as the main test website. It deals with username logins, email password logins, email identity providers like Gmail, and social network identity providers like Facebook. That's been our testing. But I'll be very interested, to talk to some of you all directly, if there are other ways where we could tune this UI to make it work better for some of those websites. I mentioned that some of the sort of advanced problems that come up with identity providers. One of the ones we're trying to cover is a computer used by multiple people in the home with the same identity provider. So the husband and wife who use Google, or the two kids who use Facebook, etc. So that's one problem we specifically tried to deal with by having a user not click a brand button, but their picture button. But then we still had to mix in there, as you all may remember earlier, or I could show it necessary. Each account entry says not just the email address of the user and their picture, but it also has a place for the identity provider to be shown. One of the things, and I can't remember if this is controllable in AC tests, so then you have to remind me, the website is able to tell the central account user what type of accounts it wants shown. So it could, for example, tell the central account user, hey, you know what, I don't know anything about identity providers, so don't even bother to show that extra line at the bottom about what the identity provider is. Just show a list of accounts with email addresses, names, and photos. Another option is to say, show everything you got, right? Which might include, for example, 2 entries for the same email address, but for different identity providers. It might include entries like for Twitter, where the email address is not provided by default, and so it's just username and identity provider. Another mode might be a website who says, okay, say for example, it's enterprise SaaS business. I know a line party, but I only trust the identity provider associated with the email domain. That's the standard in the enterprise SaaS business. And so there, you don't actually end up needing to show the identity providers, the domain name implies it, but the website is using identity providers. So the site can choose between which of those modes best meets their needs. And it may be in one of those modes we can optimize the UI more than we are at the time. But not surprisingly, when you do the UX tests or the customer tests, people just go for their picture. If their picture is available, it doesn't matter what words you put around it, they just go for their picture. It's really only if they see their picture twice do they then look at the text for disambiguating between the two entries. So I don't, Greg and Tim, you guys have seen this a bunch over the time, right? If you guys have other ideas how to refine the UI, but you haven't incorporated yet.
Generally, people respond to it. Generally, so in the social sense, Facebook, for example, everything they do is driven around photos instead of just engagement. What about some of the top properties?
Well, and I guess one thing to note is the account does have a fallback mode as says Google when the photo isn't available. Like Google, for example, we're going to deploy the account with all of our users, only like a couple percentage have photos. Of the people who don't, they try out without it, but we actually find like for lack of their photos sort of incents them to go and add it later. The other nice thing about the central account is you only need one website ever to stick the user's photo in there. And even if the user goes to another website that knows nothing about photos and doesn't store them or do anything with them, the user will still see it in their account. So if, for example, they ever log into Facebook or Twitter or anyone else that has a photo, they only need to get it in there once. John Bradley, I think I heard either you or Jason. Okay.
So my question was along the lines of the filtering example you were giving. Has anyone there put any thought into more abstract filters like IDPs that belong to a particular federation, like research and education, or something that could be identified? So, if a university were to use this, you probably wouldn't want them attempting to log in with some completely random account that is going to be rejected. You want to, either for a government site or university or other site, you want to try and restrict it down to get them to use the accounts that will work.
Yep, I believe technically today you can pass in a whitelist of IDPs, right? So you can pass in, Facebook.com, Twitter.com, MySpace.com. We could extend that same technology to pass in a reference to a list of IDPs stored somewhere else. Then, of course, as John Bradley knows well, we would need a standard way for the central account user to go and dynamically find that list, based on that input, get the list of IDPs from it, and then compare it to the set of accounts it already has. But I think that's a relatively easy thing to add, especially if we get someone to help contribute the code for that intent.
a trust framework reference, yes. I think that's probably more likely to get relying parties to understand than having them attempt to manually hand roll lists of trusted IDPs as this scales.
Though, I would make the claim now, I'll look at Janrain and Giga, you guys already do have a large but not huge list of IDPs. You already ask your customers to configure what IDPs they support. So they're basically starting with the trust framework of Janrain or Giga, and they're picking a subset of it. The same thing with Ping. You guys always support a white list too. Is that true, right? So I like to refer to the Janrain and Giga trust framework.
Right. So essentially, they're providing that service. If somebody were doing this without Janrain or Giga, they may find.
To be honest, I could imagine supporting a feature where someone passed into the central account user, hey, I support all the identity providers supported by Giga, or all of them supported by Janrain, or all of them except these 3, depending on the size. But that's the type of thing why you guys are here, to try to figure out what features would make this work better with your customers and your products.
What about defining your own identity provider? You've got a closed circle of one identity provider and one relying party, and the one who's handling it.
But right now, you could do it. Anyone in the world can redirect the user to the add account page. You're passing in a string email, a string IDP, a string name, etc. The account user does not attempt to block the ability of the user to add an entry, so you can add any. So that's why, one of the things that Google wants to get to as a point is, we want to, if a Gmail user buys a new computer, chances are the first thing they're going to log into is either Facebook or Google. If they log into Google, we want it to be the case that the machine is immediately bootstrapped with an entry in the account user, so that theoretically they never see an Ask Our page again. Any website they go to, it has their picture, they click it, and they're done. We would similarly suggest that enterprises do the same thing. Enterprises, an employee logs in, add it there. And when I've gone around, and some of the rest of you in the room have, and talked with international IDPs or smaller IDPs who, for example, have never felt their button is going to be on, say, the Yahoo login page next to Facebook and Google, and pointed out to them, this is finally a way for them to make their identity provider accounts discoverable. If you log into Mixi, in Japan, they could immediately add your account to the central account user, and even if you went to visit a website that might not have a lot of overlap with the Mixi population, you just see your entry there and boom, click it. So, one of the things we've tried to achieve with the account user based on our learnings from InfoCard and other projects is, let's build this as a layer on top of what we already have. So none of this requires an identity provider to do anything. While this works with Facebook and MySpace and Google, etc., none of those IDPs have changed anything about what they do today, and it still just works with them. They have the optional ability to, at login time or any other point on their site, to suggest that a user add an account to the central. Right?
So your goal is to have this
Google is certainly going to do it. We're going to suggest that all identity providers should. Right? So, certainly, I will say I hope my mom will never see an Ask Our page or password page other than entering a password maybe once, right, on a new machine. That would be a nice goal to get to. Okay.
So, having tried to explain this to people and brought up the sites and all of that, is there any way that we, now that I've seen the testing tool, if we could pass in a test user so that the very first thing that people see isn't an empty user?
When they do what in particular?
When they first access a site.
Well, when they, do you mean just so they can see how it works, or?
Well, the problem is when I give this demo,
right.
You bring it up, you click the button, and there's nothing there, right? And the ugliest part of the whole process...
It should fall back to the login page as an Ask Our page, right?
Well, it does. That's the problem. And then they say, well, it's just an Ask Our page.
So I don't know if you've noticed this. If you go to the...
That's like the demo. When it's a branch account and then nothing else.
So you got to read the demo instructions, Pam.
Oh, no.
So,
what? No one else is going to. I can.
Yeah, but you're trained, right? So by the way, if you look at the list of tasks to work on, look out to the biz, one is actually just to change what the home page looks like. But I do want to point out that if I can get this up, if you go to the list of demos, the first So let's see. If you go to instructions for using the demo apps. Okay, so this section. So what you can do is you can pretend that Google is already automatically adding entries to the central account chooser. So on this page, what you can do is say your Gmail account or some test Gmail account. Go to this, type this link once, and opt into joining the experiment. Do that once ever. And then in the future, what you can do is, let's say, what I do is I want to say, imagine you are logging into gmail.com for the first time, and instead of typing gmail.com at the top, I click this link. When I do, the next thing they see is a Gmail login page. They type their email address, or I type my email address and password in a touchdown. I hit return. The next thing I see is the add account page on the central account user. I click it. I am brought back, and the next thing that I see is my Gmail inbox. That is what we expect the experience will be on Google in the coming months. Right? Now I say, great, now that you've done that, you've just bought the new computer, you logged into Google once, now go up to any of the other demo sites. And if they go up to any of the other demo sites, they immediately see that account. Right? Now, what I sometimes prefer to do is to get them to do it with their real account and get them to go here once. Because as long as they've done that once ever, I can get them to repeat this process themselves and train other people. Right? And hopefully soon in the future, they won't even have to do this. You will literally be able to tell them, go to Gmail, log in. Oh, look, you bootstrapped your account. Now go somewhere else. But for demo purposes, that's exactly why those two things are there. We're actually, Ming Cheng, do you know if this waitlist thing is working now? No. It's not working yet? No. It's not. Okay. So we are very close to getting it to the point where any Gmail user can go to this link. They will no longer use optional experiments. Just be like this. So we're going to have like go/new Gmail login. You can tell any Gmail user in the world, log out, type go/new Gmail log in. They'll see the central account user, they'll add their account, and then you say, great. You can now type any of the other demo sites, including demo sites you know. How about that?
Well, so that's better, but ultimately, people just are blindly applying for the experience. Right.
And that's where I want the video that I showed you this morning. We're playing with, I was about to say, I do have marketing needs to play with what's on the home page.
Yeah. Because if you could put, if the capability exists to feed that with a bogus account that just shows a photo and your name here, at least they understand what they're supposed to see once they seeded it.
So, for example, if they saw something more like...
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which I wonder if you're leading into the next topic. Okay, so we talked about UX assignments, we talked about SNI. Great, how convenient, Pam. Why don't you, Pam, give a summary of the status of the OIDF marketing committee efforts on the website? Did you just walk into that chat?
Yeah, pretty well. We've been interacting with Cloud4 to create a very, very simple framework for how to communicate with something. So the original efforts were Eric and myself and Don Siebel from the OIDF. We actually drew up, a mock-up of the design useful, and that mock-up was. I don't know. Can you guys hear me? Sort of. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, pretty well.
So we created a mock-up with the idea that the navigation for that site would be a selector itself, and then you could select the different types of people who might want to interact with an account user. I think what we're going to end up with is much simpler. It's not going to be a big website. It's going to be small, almost a brochure site, with really the idea to be, 5 pages, 6 pages?
And I was going to walk through it quickly.
Oh, perfect.
So as an example of what we are trying to do, you notice, we're taking this central account user, we're going to put it everywhere we can on the web, every Google login box, every other website we can do it. And you'll notice at the bottom is this learn more about this link, which some percentage of people will click, either because A, they are an end user who's like, I don't know what to do. To be honest, we don't see a lot of that. What we think is more likely is that it's going to be a website operator saying, wow, my competitor has that awesome thing over there. Why the heck don't I have it on my site? We may even at the bottom, we've talked about putting a link that says, for website operators. Anyway, assuming they just click the end user one, there's that page I just showed that right now it's getting pretty small, and we're trying to get it smaller. That basically says, dude, just click a friggin' account at the top. And the bottom part is more advanced stuff about if someone wants to turn off the account chooser or delete accounts, how to do it. So that's pretty advanced stuff. But then on the page it has a link that says, hey, would you like to learn how to actually deploy an account chooser? That is targeted at website operators. And the goal is to drive as many website operators as possible to a page. And this is what we're paying Cloud for to create, where it would be a very marketing-focused page that says, dude, you're at the right place. We can help you get an account chooser integrated with your website in 2 stages, where the first stage is very little work. Maybe it's little, and we're going to have to figure it out this afternoon, as little as dropping some JavaScript on your login and sign-up pages. That's step 1. But wait, there's more. If you like that and you're ready to either A, get out of the password business, or B, want to do social login or enterprise cases, and Greg, I'm sure, has done his homework and come up with those 50 sentences, Greg, that we're going to have at the bottom there, right? Yeah. So at the bottom it says, if you are... Yes, exactly. Right? So, so if the website operator is deploying account chooser but still has passwords, then the next step is, dude, we want to get you out of the password management business. Here's very short value propositions why. And if they click that, what we then want to take them to is, and now there are sort of different versions of this. Let's see, this is IDP, which one? On BNRP, I think it is. We want to, hopefully with as few clicks as possible, get them to a page that pushes the vendor product. Right? So hopefully as a website operator who sees the account chooser on the competitor's page, clicks either learn more and for website operators or just immediately website operators, sees one basic value proposition. You can implement an account chooser in a few minutes, and then if you want to do more, go here. And the more go here would bring them to a list of vendors who can help them become a reliant partner. So this is why the Marketing Foundation's job here is, and now there are 2 parts of it, and let's be honest about those 2 parts. The OpenID Foundation, at a high-level perspective, the goal is to increase adoption of these types of websites out of the password business, sort of the short 50 version. Then there are members of the OpenID Foundation who make money off helping companies to do things. OpenID Foundation is trying to connect the 2 groups. We want to funnel in as many website operators as possible, and then connect them to the vendors who are part of the foundation. And so the OpenID Marketing Committee has a mix of both of such groups, and we're paying Cloud for to help us, create that pipeline as much as possible. Now, this pipeline is very specifically focused around websites who want to become reliant parties. There are other pages of the site that will be built for example, someone who is trying to become a consumer identity provider, where, for example, there are different vendors who play, like CA, or they want to become an enterprise identity provider. Other things like, they want to understand, what problem the OpenID Foundation is solving. So working on some diagrams to explain the problems of password reuse, which people, generally don't understand. But the first thing that we're paying Cloud for to do is to help us come up with, as Sam said, about 5 to 10 pages, but really 3 main ones, to drive users from seeing the account chooser on their competitor's website and hopefully calling up, generating lead gen. Well, they could call Sam too, directly. Gitcade and Microsoft as well, but primarily the 3 more direct sales. Okay? So that's the efforts of the OpenID Marketing Foundation. As part of that, then, Sam said, we do want to use that to create the homepage of accountchooser.com if the user has no entries. If they do have entries, they will show them and they can delete them. If it doesn't have entries, to Pam's point, we want to show something more than a blank page. We'll also create the landing pages for the Learn More link. Now, one thing you might reasonably be asking, okay, why are we creating a new website? Why are we not replacing the OpenIDFoundation.net website? Eventually, we expect we will, but we're doing this in stages. So what we're actually planning on building is the accountchooser.net website. That will hold the majority of the static content to keep it off the pages where we're running the accountchooser.com service. Then, for example, the .NET pages will probably have like analytics on it and stuff like that shouldn't be mixed with the rest of it. And we're going to separate these two pieces. So Penn and Greg and I are on the marketing committee. I think good.
Yeah, I usually
Yep. But you keep an eye on it.
I do.
And Cloud 4, in a perfect world, will, I think it's early May, would have something they think is launchable. And we're already, for example, like some of the stuff they're doing for us is they're just picking stock photos of people's pictures that we will be used on marketing logos and documentation, etc. They're updating Andy Daly's old keyhole icon because they need to change one dot so it can be owned by the Andy Foundation. So we're pretty happy with the progress there, and we're trying to time it to coincide with when accounts.com is available, so that if it does get these more press awareness, we can use that to drive people to the products that can actually help people do this type of stuff. All right, so let me go back to, I have so many of these. Does anybody on the video conference have questions for Pam, Greg, or I about the marketing committee work in this area? I'll take that as a no. Cool. So we basically got through all of the background information, and a lot of this is, I would say generally marketing spiel and stuff. I think some of you all are aware that actually, can the four people you let's see, Gui Bing, Ming Ching, and Jin Wei, you got four of you want to stand up for a moment? So these are the four guys who I think many of you all have heard me talk about, who I've worked with in Beijing for the last couple of years. You guys should clap for them because they built this whole thing. And they have all moved here, including a couple of them with family, have physically moved here just 6 weeks ago, right now in our corporate housing and everything, because we want to get more people than these four Googlers contributing to this code base. Right? Both to do a better job, as well as to reasonably just make it, be less of a Google thing. We want to get people to contribute. Now, historically, yeah.
Are you happy that everything
Notice they didn't jump off in excitement. I heard some happiness last night that they weren't in a huge city anymore, so I'll take that. I'll probably take them to Santa Cruz Boardwalk after that, and they'll be happy. So most of the feedback that I've gotten from, including many of you all in the room and on the DC on this effort, has primarily been funneled to me, that I funneled to them. Ideas from IIWs, from just meeting with me directly. That's great. We are as Google happy to contribute to have these guys and more work on this. Like Jazz and Mark here had not been involved in the project until really just like 2 weeks ago. And we've had some interactions back and forth, but we waited until the team was here in Mountain View before doing the stuff with Kaha. We have the Google account login system team who is deploying their own account chooser. That team and this team sits 20 feet from each other, and in the next quarter, we are planning on using some of the exact same JavaScript that we've been talking about here, using the exact same JavaScript in Google's account chooser. For example, Google's account chooser stores the political accounts in a cookie. You can't put many entries there without it being side problem. We want to store that stuff in HTML file storage, and voila, we have this team who has the technology to store those accounts in JavaScript. How convenient. Right? So while I want to get the four of them working with more Googlers, more security reviews, ops reviews, we'd really like to try to get a couple of you guys to be involved in helping improve this. And there's one specific task that I will actually thank Pam for that came out of the marketing committee discussion the last time we met, which was, when was that, Greg and Pam? When did we meet up? A month ago. So when the marketing committee met, and we were trying to think about, okay, put ourselves in the shoes of a website operator who knew nothing about the account chooser until he encountered it on his competitor's website. We said, okay, we need something to grab their attention and show them they can do something quickly. And the reality is for a lot of websites, especially if they have people logging with passwords, they have a help desk, becoming a line party is not an overnight task. Right? That is a more involved thing. And we said, well, wait, we're already telling websites that they could choose to implement an account chooser first as a stepping stone. Let's not just say that, let's help them do it. And so what Pam suggested is we find a way to make it as simple as possible for a website to just integrate with the central account user, nothing more. And then later, they could then go back and integrate some of the line party products. And so that was the primary homework we suggested we take after the event. Now, there is a document linked here with our general ideas for how to do this, which, and Naveen, do you want to walk up in front? I'm going to keep on making Googlers stand up and talk. I could do one of these other guys, but I haven't embarrassed you yet. Make them walk all the way over. Make them walk all the way over. Make them walk all the way over. Okay. So Naveen, well, if y'all don't know, is the engineering manager of 2 teams at Google, both the team in Beijing. He's also the engineering manager for the team who runs Google's OAuth service provider, and also came from Yahoo's identity team, so these are our Yahoo folks. So hopefully many of y'all have seen him at IIW. So I'm going to attempt to describe this, and then Naveen can tell me where I get this wrong, because I want to be able to tell a website how easily they're going to be able to integrate the central account user with their site. What we want to be able to tell them is that there are 4 steps, and I think we can get this. This is a bit wordy right now. We can get it down. Okay, the first step we tell them they need to do is they need to provide a API exposed to JavaScript on their site that will tell the account user whether an email address is registered or not. If it's registered, it needs to ask the user for a password to get them logged in. If it's not registered, it needs to show a registration form. So we say that's the thing they need to do on their server. The next thing that they need to do, actually I've done this tested. Let me do it the other way around. The first thing they need to do is there's a JavaScript file we as the OpenID Foundation provides, and we want them to put it in the current HTML of their sign-up form and of their login page. And so we say, here's the JavaScript, like include this, make these few small tweaks. So that's step 1 and step 2. Step 3 is to provide that API that the JavaScript can call to decide, is it in the right place? If the user ends up on the sign-up form, oops, should they have been over in login? Or they end up on login, oops, should they have been over in sign-up? Get them in the right place. After they've either logged in or signed up, then the last task that the user needs to do, which is actually number 2 here, is before the website sets a session cookie for the user, it should redirect one more time to either its login or sign-up page. And the JavaScript on that page will detect, did the user just log into an account that's not yet in the central account user? Because if so, I better bounce the user there to add it, so it'll be there when they come back. So that is my description of what we think is this step.
Yes. I think the biggest issue would be, or the time consuming might be the user status URL. People may think about the security issues and other things, but we have thought a lot. But actually, in some way, if you have a login system, you already provide the status through a combination of login and registration. So it's new software, but actually there is, I think we think there is a need to either you will have to tell whether that's not No, without the password. We are actually talking about this is no password. This is just a...
If it was for Google or Yahoo, maybe we're lowering the bar, though we have so many backdoors to get it. Well, I've done a large audit of the websites that we target of like top 300. The number of them who password recovery, for example, or sign-up registration tells you which. The easiest one actually tends to be the sign-up form. So you go into the sign-up form, type an email address that already exists. As far as I couldn't find a site other than Google and Yahoo that wouldn't tell you what the state was. Hotmail actually leaks it. Yahoo and Google don't. But we give such bad error messages that I actually think it causes problems for our users.
Actually, Yahoo does afterwards. I mean, on the login page, actually, if the account did not exist, they'll prompt you, are you trying to sign up? Because a lot of people actually come in and sign up. So everybody gets out that error message, but just I think in the past that has been made people disclose this.
Right. Now, interestingly, if the website becomes 100% a line party and doesn't have any passwords, well, then it actually doesn't need this. You just you get in either an email address or an identifier, and you do the redirect, and only after you get a digital assertion back do you figure out whether to go to sign-up flow or registration flow. But this is for sites who are not that sophisticated. So Pam, how does that sound as an answer to the homework assignment? What's our grade?
I think it's pretty good. I want to go through it though.
Okay, how about even more? How about you help us write those JavaScript files?
Yeah, sure.
See? Okay, she's going to help. So we believe that is actually the next step that we should take. Or like I say, we already have JavaScript that it wasn't designed to make it as simple as possible. We just do it this way. But and now I don't know, do you guys think it's going to be a large amount of work to change our current JavaScript to this, or medium, or not that much? Not months. Some of them are hopefully small weeks, right? And then down below we have a little bit more detail on it. But Pam had hoped that we could, on this marketing page, like if a user sees an account, user clicks, yes, I want to put one on my website. We might actually have market text stuff that you can do this in 4 steps. Put the JavaScript file on your sign up and login pages, expose this one API, make this one call before sending your session cookie, and you're done. And if we could honestly say that, we think we could drive a lot of sites to add this extremely quickly, right? Now the people, yes.
Hey, Eric. If a site is adding this to their capability to their website and they already allow people to log in, how does that website sort of separate their login users from those who might want to go in the account chooser? Because it doesn't really make sense to put that user in the account chooser and then they go to some other site that supports account chooser, but their login at foophotos.com is just not supported. I could see that account chooser getting hundreds of accounts because I've got hundreds stuck in my keychain.
Yes, well, you're not normal, George, but we all know that. So the most common case that we're targeting is people who have a couple email addresses that they use to log into websites. Their work, their personal, a couple of other personals. And I mentioned before that websites do get to tell the account chooser whether the website, for example, supports identity providers or not. So it can, filter out the ones that requires that. But if for example, imagine the concept of federated login didn't exist and it was all just, it was just all login with email address and password. In that case, all the entries are in the account chooser is your email address. So when you go to another website, you could log in with that email address. It might not be the email address you use on that site. You might use a different one on that site. But you certainly could, with basically almost any email address on almost any website, you could log in. And so it would help you from that extent. There's some other UX optimizations where I was hoping to convince some people to contribute who, for example, have abnormally large amounts of accounts, hint, hint, where we could potentially do other optimizations like have the account chooser track just on that computer what is the last account you used on this site and put it at the top of the list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or what are the ones you use the most frequently? To be honest, based on the stats we've seen from Google's usage of it and Google's use of a feature called multi-login, we see such a tiny percentage of people who have more than 4 email addresses that they use that I at least have not prioritized that work so far. But those types of optimizations could be done. Do you think that would help? Or
yeah, I was going to mention 2 things. I think George's question, if the site is allowing login based on email address and password, then there is nothing wrong in actually other sites sticking the password because most of the people will have maybe 2 or 3 email addresses at most, right? The one which you are questioning is where they ask for a ID and password, which is a website-specific ID. That's where I think ideally we would want them to insert the email address if possible. And that is the one we haven't actually talked about. What should they do if it's just a purely ID and password? There is no email address on the third-party side.
Correct.
That's
Don't use the account chooser.
Yes. So that's when it's not that valuable. I agree with that. Basically, that's what
like
what
a bank.
Yes.
A banking website.
Right. Well, banks are actually using email addresses.
Well, that's what we're.
Yeah. No,
Well, some, yeah, but a lot of the ones I have are basically IDs, or they give you, or even I was checking a bunch of the hotel, whatever reward point sites. They take an email address, but they say choose a username.
Yep.
So, by the way, the other thing we haven't talked about, the little bit more optimizations we have been doing, which will make some of these problems go away. And I don't think we talked about the local account chooser versus the central.
Talked about it a little bit. I said it was an advanced thing.
Yeah. So it'll get complicated, but I think that actually solves a bunch of these usability issues, or some corner cases in that case.
Right. I mean, interestingly, many of the banks are the best example of websites who have a account chooser today. Most banks where you log in with your username have a little box underneath it. Do you want to remember this account so when you come back, the login box already has an entry for the account and you just click it and all you're asked for is your password, right? Their thing, though, is they generally only support one, which I, for example, find annoying because my wife has a bunch of bank accounts for her business at the same places where we personally do it, and so we keep on having to change it. I wish they had a local account chooser with 2 entries, and they certainly could build one. By the way, George, hearing your voice did remind me of some things I skipped by from earlier that is worth noting. One thing George has noted is I'm not sure we have proper support yet for users who have disabled, am I saying this correctly, George? Disabled third-party cookies. We need to improve that.
Yeah, so I definitely ran into that case with Chrome. I had other issues with Firefox. And it appears that the other issue that I saw is that on Chrome I also had only store like cookies or data per session or something. I had some settings. So basically, when I just went back in Chrome to accountchooser.biz, even though I've been through the process to add people a couple times, my list was empty. So I'm not quite sure what we do about that, but for people who like clear their cookies or clear their local storage or whatever, if that basically erases their list, that could cause problems.
Right. So as we get more experience, we wanted to detect these advanced scenarios where people have configured their browser in less common ways and handled it. I also wanted to mention one other thing we've tested here, which is the interaction of the account chooser with password autofill. So one of the really cool things that we noticed is at least Firefox and Chrome, if a website does password logins and uses an account chooser, well, the account chooser will pre-fill the email address, and if the page is configured to pre-fill the password, the browser will automatically fill the password. And if you have stored more than one email address password combination for that site, the browser will automatically fill in the correct password. So this is one of the things, for example, that we found our Gmail users really love. If you have 2 Gmail accounts on a computer, you just go to the Gmail homepage, you click the account you want to use, and the correct password is automatically filled in. Whereas traditionally, the browser would just either autofill one and it would be right half the time, or it would force you to start doing type ahead again. Now, Safari is a little different. Safari doesn't even turn on password autofill by default, but if you do turn it on, it doesn't work well with the account chooser. What actually happens is if you have saved more than one password for the site in Safari, through the account chooser, it pre-fills the email address, and you will see the correct email address and the correct password entered briefly, and then it will change to the other one, which is the wrong one. So that's what Safari does. So, for example, websites that use the account chooser will probably want to detect that it's done on Safari and just disable the password autofill feature. On the IE, it's sort of in the middle. It doesn't break, but it doesn't smartly autofill the password either, so the user has to type it manually. So you have these different stages. I think you guys saw that Microsoft wants to host the next account chooser working group meeting once they finish their IPR reviews. So hoping someday we can convince the IE people to do whatever Firefox and Chrome did. I mean, the Firefox and Chrome stuff worked, and those guys have no idea account chooser even exists. It's just their implementations work nicely. Something about Internet Explorer did not. All right. So I said that Pam gave us this homework of figuring out the smallest set of documentation that would be available for website operators to implement an account chooser. I also wanted to show you that I've done the opposite task, which is write the longest piece of documentation available for a website that wants to implement an account chooser. Some of you guys are already aware of this. Google, and myself in particular, have been keeping track of every piece of research we've done, that the rest of you guys have done on identity efforts, what worked, what doesn't. Last November, I went through and I just created one big long document. Microsoft Word claimed if I had printed it, it would have been 912 pages. So not many people are going to go back and read that. So I said based on the encounters, I felt that we were finally ready to be much more prescriptive with websites about how to actually run a login system overall. So I went through all of that. I mean, a lot of it was screenshots, which is why it was so big. For example, slideshow presentations. Joseph Smart was probably a couple hundred pages of slideshow presentations. And there is this now book, that you literally could print out as a PDF that's got 30 pages that suggests that it's basically a targeted someone's login system and says, hey, here's what your login system probably looks like. Here's the way it's probably designed as is. Why don't you start by deploying an account chooser as your first step? And in step 5, it talks about starting to become a relying party to the site. Now, interestingly, and you might appreciate this, it has this one step in the middle called, in chapter 2, called mobile and desktop apps. Because one of the big things, and Pam can confirm this, is a lot of websites that become relying parties do so, and then about 24 hours later realize they broke their iOS and their Android apps. And what ends up is websites have to update those mobile apps before they become a relying party, at all. And sometimes it could take months for that to happen. Only after that point can they really start experimenting with being a relying party. And so that chapter goes in and points to what right now are best industry techniques. I'm going to say not best, not good. There are ways we wish it would be better. And so Pam and I were talking earlier about things we're trying to do with the current versions of iOS and Android and with Chrome on Windows to make this a little bit better. Most of you all probably know right now the best practice is your mobile app opens up an embedded web view with an empty cookie jar, does an OAuth dance, which means the user will not see an account chooser, will have to retype their password, probably see a consent page as well. That is unfortunate. It'd be a lot better if the user could just, with the mobile app, open up the main browser jar where a couple of things might be true. In the best case, they are in the mobile browser logged into their home server, in which case they don't even need to type the password, they don't need to pick an account, they probably just see a consent page, and actually with work like people like Munjal, who's from our Chrome team, it may even be possible for the app to say, for the home server to say, hey, I've got an OAuth token, I'd like to get it back to digitally signed app 64, on the Windows PC, the Android device, the iOS, etc. Get the token back to the app, so the app, experiences. The user goes to the app, clicks sign in, there's a flash as it opens up a web browser, closes, token comes back, and you're done. Right?
Or experience that didn't rely on that way.
So it would be on the main web view as opposed to the embedded web view, but still a lot of web view.
Purely relying on some API call. I don't know,
right.
Let's assume that you can access the chart. You have something you can populate.
Not in the next year for what I would call the big complicated guys. If you are already logged in to your website's home server, and it isn't a sophisticated one who has to deal with abuse systems and captchas and stuff like that, then I do think it would be possible for, and now let's use Android or iOS as an example. When you go and register your Android application, you might be able to prove, hey, I'm associated with, cribwars.com is the domain. Therefore, my app should have the ability to steal cookies right out of that. So your, iOS app, when it launches, it might be able to have OS level permissions to go steal the cookie out, take it, make an API call back to your home server, give the cookie and say, give me an OAuth token, right?
I guess I'm more curious about the case. I guess the Chrome app is open to simpler cases that you're already in the browser, so you have a lot of freedom here. But you actually have a mobile app on Android that's an iOS app.
So that's
you're not signing in at all. and you want to have
if you're not signed into the website, especially if the website decides to become a relying party, I'm going to make a claim that not in the next 5 years will you be able to avoid the user seeing a web browser. If you are signed in on the home server, I think within 2 years the user will be able to avoid seeing a web browser, but I just don't think that will be the common case. I think most people are installing an Android app because they haven't logged into the server on the mobile web view and have no plans to do so. Right? But if we can at least get them to avoid typing the password, and it's either a flicker, well, that's a funny term to use with you, but either the screen flickers, or maybe it opens up a web view where a user sees a consent page, just so they're not so surprised by the flicker, is about what we're going to get to. The other one that has come up is to move that step a little bit earlier in the process. This would require more work by the marketeers of Android and iOS. But one of the things we've talked about is when a user, for example, is in the Android market and pick the Netflix application, so they haven't installed it yet. So they're in the market, they pick the Netflix application. Usually in that process, the user is consenting to install it, consenting to what privileges it has in the OS. We as Google, for example, already have a web-based version of the Android market. What if in that flow, before the app was installed, you did the OAuth dance to your home server, the token came to Android market, which then, after the app was downloaded, handed it off to it. That's something we've also talked about with the Android team and the Apple team as well. Of course, they need us to prove that the simpler version works first. And we're getting closer there, but not quite. Right? So we're going to have the 4-page steps for how to do this, like I said, and then this 30-page guide. It is, while a lot of it is my writing, it's based on the whole identity community's work the last few years. All of you guys, are part of it. I do plan to continue to keep it up to date. I'm getting a few thousand people a day who read it, and so if you guys have suggestions on improvements to it, add it and flush it out, I think that's something that's worth doing as a community. So short version and long version. So now let me get to protocol stuff. So when we started the account chooser project, the #1 rule that I actually gave to the group who was working on it was, #1, you couldn't require any changes to the browser, and #2, you couldn't be protocol specific. It had to work with SAML as well as OpenID Connect, password set activity. You want to suggest a break? But that'd be nice for me. How many people like to know where drinks are and snacks, and how many people the bathroom? All right, you guys don't even admit it. Okay, bathroom is on the other side of that blue wall over there. So if anybody who's not ready to just turn around and watch it a few times. Then how about a couple of us? I will at least walk that way. We'll go and get drinks and snacks. Take a couple minute break with this. Thank you to me. Yeah, but if you're low in power, there's a bunch of open chats way over there. There's a bunch in the front room. And those of you on the VC, feel free to take a break too. See John at least and George and Jason. Feel free to take a break. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
All right, we lost your connection that was showing the screen.
Oh, really? Okay. I will. When I come back, I will rejoin that one, George. Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks.
I'll go.
No, I do not. I do not think there's a warrant for that photo.
I mean, kind of almost that.
What?
For that happens. Well,
Oh, good.
my strategy for breaking
You can find some power source, yeah. There's more power up there, and there are more.
I guess I could stretch it all the way out back, is what you're saying?
Baby chain it all. I don't know what.
That's an idea.
Code that way over here. Yeah, definitely.
So how are we planning on managing the Connect specs call in an hour? I have a feeling this is going to go longer than an hour. No, you're still muted, Nat.
Okay. So, yeah, it's supposed to be longer than 1 hour. So we'd have to drop off and do the connect call.
Okay, so I guess the 2 or 3 of us will drop off. Pam will have to stay because it's probably rude to be taking a conference call in the meeting.
Yeah.
That's just speculation. I would do it.
I wish we would.
And so there's originally
Hey, John and Jason and George and Nat, I believe I'm projecting again for the document if you guys want to see it. And the next part is the geeky stuff, John and Nat, where I will be taking your name in vain or begging you for help, one of the two. So thank you for staying with us as long as you have.
So I should point out that in 50 minutes, Nat and I and probably George have to go to the Connect work group call. So we'll have to drop off for about an hour.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'll get the short version of this. How about I'll do it in 15 minutes? And actually, maybe I'll even start now. And people can join us, and I'll then give the summary. Let's see. Oh, come on, document. Protocol. Great. Okay, so the rest of the account user stuff, and like the rest will, when they come, they'll join. So Nat and John, I'll mostly talk to the two of you and George and Pam. Are you going to join that call too?
No.
Okay. So the rest of the account user stuff that we talked about so far is protocol agnostic, nothing specific to a specific federation protocol. The next few pieces potentially start to be. They at least start to imply a protocol layered on top of it. One of the features that I'm going to spend some time talking about with this group is the thing that is linked here called the two-click consent flow. The idea here is, imagine a user who goes to a website they've never visited before in their life, and they see the account user, they click, say, a Gmail account they want to use on that site. Traditionally, if that site were a relying party, the site would then bounce them back in an OpenID flow, and the user would have to consent again on the Google consent page. Now, when we do usability tests of that, we consistently hear complaints from users that, oh no, they ran into a bug. They're being asked the same thing twice. Like, almost 100% of the people in the UX testing report that, because from their perspective, they already gave their consent to share their email address with the site. So what we have experimented with instead is the idea that when the user clicks an account on the central account chooser, the central account chooser can load an iframe to their identity provider and say, hey, identity provider, this user just clicked their account to go to this website. Can you, identity provider, please remember that fact, either storing it server-side or in a cookie? And it says, okay, identity provider, if you're done remembering that fact, I'm now going to send the user back to the relying party, but with a hint saying, hey, you should try check ID immediate or the equivalent for your other protocol to get the user logged in. If they do so, and if the IDP has remembered that the user has already given consent, then it can immediately bounce back with an ID token or OpenID, signature, etc., without the user seeing a consent page again, as long as the relying party doesn't ask for any more information than is in the account picture, i.e. email, photo, name. So no access to, address book, photos, etc. Does that make sense, John or Nat?
It sounds like a nice idea. There are any number of issues that are lurking in that.
And that starts to impact the federation protocol. So that's where I think we start to edge beyond the account using work group and maybe to something more, protocol security geekish. So that's one thing. The next one to sort of note, interestingly, is if you take that approach, there really, it is perfectly fine for the identity provider to remember that consent in a cookie instead of server-side storage. And interestingly, it takes away almost all the need for the for the identity provider to ever store server-side that consent. Because if the user on a different computer goes to that same website and goes to the account user again and clicks the account they want to use, it can use that same hidden iframe trick to get logged in. So one of the conclusions is that it could enable an identity provider to choose to say that it will not track which relying parties you visit, which is obviously, a business claim, not a protocol claim. Does that make sense? And a lot of that has come out of discussions. I've been spending a lot of time with the Firefox browser ID people recently to get them to try to tell us what is different in their protocol and approach than what we're already doing with the account chooser. And the main thing we've come to conclude is if we can make this two-click consent functionality work in the account chooser, then we have a large superset of the functionality that they're trying to achieve in browser ID. And so if, and again, we're not going to resolve it here, but if we're able to get broader consensus among our community that that functionality is achievable, we can resolve, honestly, we might be able to find a way to get the browser ID guys involved with us, and also, honestly, address some of the traditional FUD about OpenID, not being privacy sensitive because identity providers track where you go type of thing. So keep that in mind. The other things, just as you guys go to the OpenID Connect meeting, is the last couple of bullets here, all stuff, John, you and Nat are very well aware of, but, Google, and you'll notice, well, Naveen's not back yet, but, like Brenno's not here. Even Google's OpenID Connect service provider team hasn't spent a lot of time on discovery or dynamic registration, and Brenno's only been able to do a subset of the session management. One of the reasons that I and Naveen and Andrew Nash care about those is that if we are able to get this account chooser deployed, then as I think you guys probably already recognize, it creates the potential for there to be a lot more identity providers, a lot more relying parties, where now the only feasible way to have the interconnections work is for us to have a stable form of discovery and dynamic registration, which we have with OpenID v2. We would need to be confident it exists in other protocols like OpenID Connect as well. I know you guys have proposals for that, and I will say that Google hasn't been able to prioritize looking at them, but if we get more confidence from the community that we found an approach here that scales to a larger number of IDPs, then it's easier for Andrew Dash to go and tell us to give more attention to that. Similarly, in the session management stuff, I think you've heard me say that I've been working with Brenno, but we're not done, to try to figure out what sort of identity hints the account chooser should pass to an identity provider. So for example, if a computer is shared by a husband and wife, and the husband clicks his account in the account chooser, but the wife is logged into the identity provider, hopefully enough hints would be passed through that somewhere in the chain the user would be helped into logging into that other account. So the last three bullets, that you're seeing on the screen here are the ones where the next, maybe the last two bullets, yeah, are all related to having protocol-specific stuff. The two-click flow is not OpenID Connect specific, but is sort of halfway between a protocol and what we're doing here with the account chooser. So
it's sort of a consent proxy sort of operation. Now,
yeah.
Given that such a thing doesn't exist, it's sort of new territory. The biggest problem is the account chooser doesn't have any good way of identifying the relying party.
Other than through the chain of iframes.
Right. So it doesn't necessarily know what the, in OAuth, what the client ID is, and can't know because there's a different client ID for each identity provider.
And I don't think you could ever, because of that limitation, I don't think you could ever give an OAuth token for, like I say, a contacts calendar API. But I could imagine that the identity provider might be willing to pass an ID token to a very specific domain, to the same domain name that the user saw on their consent page. And the ID token is the most that the site can do even without an OAuth client ID. But that depends somewhat on how you guys have dealt with your dynamic registration.
Right. There isn't, I mean, you register the redirect URIs, but there isn't any magic that we have about identifying who in some sort of absolute term the relying party is.
Right. And so here I think all we're relying on is the same domain name that's shown on the account chooser, that's the redirect from there, is the same one that ID token might be redirected to. And, not a, what's the other token, Naveen? what's the other one, the non-ID token?
Oh, the
access token. So I think this wouldn't be sufficient for an access token. It might be sufficient for an ID token that only contains the same information that's already shown on the account chooser. Basically, so verification.
Conveniently enough, I just finished the edits for being able to pass an ID token back in the check ID immediate request. So a possible flow would be if the account chooser got an ID token with an audience restriction of the URL, that could then be passed in the immediate request to show that the user had consented.
Right. Okay. I think ID tokens are fine, but I was just going to say, in general, we have been trying to keep the central account chooser free of like a lot of protocol details and other things. And
well, yeah, but if you're having account chooser proxy consent, it's hard to get out of protocol details there.
Right. Yes. But generally, I think we are trying to make it minimal so that it doesn't actually bloat and becomes, that you have to debug it and other things and why it doesn't work.
Anyways, we're not going to design it all here. We're not going to design it all here, but this is the type of stuff, John, where these are advanced things we would like to start discussing either on the account chooser working group list and some of the OpenID Connect list, and might like your advice on which conversations might have to happen in which places. Cool. All right, I think that was it for you guys. Okay, so John and Nat, I know we only have a limited number of time for you guys. So
well, we have another half hour before we have to ditch you. So
yeah. So I'm going to go back now that the people here are back and talking. I gave these guys a short version. Now we'll get the long version to you guys. So in the document, we're now at what I call the protocol-specific optimizations. And before Naveen nicely gave me / us a break, I was talking about the fact that up to this point, the account chooser is not specific to how the user is authenticated. It could be password, SAML, OpenID, etc. So when we got to this point, one of the other things we have tried to do historically is we tried to learn as much as we could from historical experiences in this space. So, I gave the example of active clients and browser IDs of things that have done a lot but haven't been too successful. There's tons of others that we've pulled from, things that have worked, things that have not. And we keep on trying to go back to summary documents of those. And we have people like Pam and John who have been involved in many of those efforts to see, are there other things that were successful in those spaces that we have not yet incorporated? And to be honest, who else has, good ideas that we should try to merge, into this? So, I wanted to just quickly stop here. Some people might be able to say, oh, well, there's immediately some things they're thinking of that we're missing that we should grab from those. But also, just more generally, I think we should continue to be open. Pam, I'll look to you as probably one of the people, you and Naveen, although Naveen has had plenty of opportunity to throw in his ideas, but you've been involved with a lot of other approaches, including SAML and InfoCard. Are there large classes of things you think worked well in those spaces that we could adopt here that we haven't tried to yet? Or do you think have we drawn the line in sort of a good box?
I don't know, I think it's a pretty good box. I really like the idea that, in fact, you can have the non-protocol option, right, that we talked about before, and then that's kind of like a gateway drug to get people hooked on the UI without having to take that extra step of having to do all the federation work. So I'd like to see so actually some of the discussions on a native client are interesting, and I don't think anyone's looked at that yet.
Like the iOS conversations or type topics?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think that's a possibility. I guess the other one that I'd be interested in.
By the way, can I point out an interesting example there that we've already played with? I mentioned to you that I think for the foreseeable future, iOS, Android apps are probably going to have to open up a web view. If, though, they could open up the master web view, and if your master web view you would ever use the account chooser, well then when your Netflix app opened up its home server, the first thing you might see is an account chooser, even if on your mobile device you had never logged into Netflix. Now, if on that account chooser you, for example, clicked an account where you were already logged into your web view, like Facebook, Google, etc., and if your website was a relying party to it, then the user experience might be install app, click open, see list of accounts, pick one. It would go to the identifier, it would redirect back, you get logged in, and it would immediately be able to give the ID token back to the user. So I don't think we've spent a lot of time experimenting with it, but we've done a little bit enough to say that, wow, if we could get the main web browser working, with installed apps, the account chooser would probably be the main user experience that people would see for logging in to these apps.
I know you mentioned this in the document. It would conflict with the native OS's account database. Right?
Yes, if you think that one is doing a particularly good job of storing more than one account. There's this company called Android that has a really lame account manager that only stores one account.
Google is an exception.
Yes, exactly. I'm making fun of ourselves.
No, we studied a very slow form. That is the harder part. So I think if they actually job on the low, they could so I think this is the biggest advantage.
So there's an app I would suggest trying, by the way. Try TripIt's most recent Android app. It does this really cool thing where when you click sign in on the Android app, it causes Android to pop up the account manager's list of accounts, as well as the option to add another one. If you select one from there, what it does is it takes the email address from that and says, okay, Android account manager, I'm going to ignore you. It then opens up a web view to TripIt's home server and passes the email address in so you don't have to type that again, which is almost exactly what the account chooser does. And if you click, I need to add another account, it doesn't show the Android add account manager because you can add almost no account there. It opens up Trip's web browser view and sends you to their login page.
I think this is fixed. There's something we see here as a hybrid of some sort. Maybe we can bootstrap the account chooser with the local OS database.
Which, for example, Mojo might be able to speak to this. One of the other things Google is playing with, sorry, let me get rid of this button, is on many different systems, you log into the OS or you log into the browser, right? So it ends up on Android, depending on what version you have and how you do it. You log into Android using a web view. There is a mode where you can just type your username and password, but that's working for fewer and fewer accounts now. Instead, it does an OAuth flow, where in a web browser, that's actually where you type your email address and password the first time you turn on an Android phone. Once Google starts in all web logins adding an entry to the account chooser, it will end up that you will turn on your Android phone, you will see a web browser, you'll type your email address password in a web page. The next thing you will see is the central account chooser saying, do you want to add the account? You will say yes. When that's done, you're actually bounced back to the OS. And so it ends up that the central account chooser is actually what's bootstrapping the account manager, not the other way around. Chrome is a similar example. Chrome has this identity sync feature where you can log in. It happens to be the last major application at Google that still asks for email address and password. It's somewhat pathetic of ourselves. It's the last application at Google that doesn't use the web browser to log into our web browser. It's really good. Once we get that fixed, when you turn on Chrome, the first thing you see, login box, if you type your email address and password, the next thing you will see is the central account chooser if you want to add it. If you do, Chrome sync is enabled, but it ends up that the bootstrapping is actually happening the other way around.
So, on Android, I'm not developed an app, so I'm not sure, but is there a way to capture URL?
Capture URL.
As in, like, when a URL is navigated to by a user, that can happen in all
well, the OS has the ability to do that, and does, yeah.
So I wonder if we could create an app with an account user, and that basically accesses all the accounts from Android.
Well, like we're just finding right now the opposite is happening more than that one. But one of the things, and is it actually I don't think it's on this document. So the next one, you notice I have the browser ID entry here. One of the things that the browser ID folks are potentially interested in contributing to is taking the account chooser interface. Right now, there's just interface for redirects back and forth. They'd like to take their work from browser ID and define JavaScript APIs into the domain that the browser could call to read out the accounts, which is their main one. Once they do it, they'd also have the add accounts. They're right now more interested in the read out accounts because the account chooser is expected to have more entries than theirs. Theirs would only have one. and I'm trying to convince them to get involved and help us. And if we do that, hopefully it's a generic one that would work on iOS from iOS program, etc. Right? So that's active clients. Hey, John Bradley, are you still with us? Again, you're one of our old gray hairs like Pam. What do you think about where we've drawn the box? So there he is.
I'm not speaking to you anymore now that you've called me a gray hair.
But at least you have hair.
I guess there is that about it. I think that it's reasonable. It's a fair amount to digest all at once.
Yeah. Okay, well, digest and come back to us. So let me jump to browser ID for a moment. How many people have played with browser ID? Okay, a couple people. How many people have played with browser ID since the version they announced 4 weeks ago?
I have a little.
Is that George? Okay. So the biggest change of browser ID as of 4 weeks ago is it's no longer an extension of the browser. What they chose to instead to do is to pick a central domain that everyone would use, and websites would redirect to it with the set of information that they think the central domain should show as an account list. And you pick one and you'd be bounced back. That might sound a little similar. It might be exactly similar. So what we did with the Mozilla team, and if you want to go through the details, we went through and compared the UI back and forth between the two to see how where we come along. Now, their decision to try doing a generic browser version of it came out of some of the meetings we've had at IIW about the central account chooser. I think Ben refers to it as lift, I think is his word for the idea of the common domain that is somewhat like a browser extension. It all runs in the browser's logic. There's no server-side logic. It's just central domain. So they now have that UI consistency. One of the things, though, that was very important to them was, and some of you all may have heard me talking about with John Bradley, is that there is a problem with the account chooser right now by default, which is, let's say the user is dealing with a website that's a Google-aligned party. Now, if it's a site the user has never logged into it before, uses central account chooser, what will happen is, and for example, my wife, because she's been complaining to me about this for years, seeing how this project evolves, she'll go to a website that has the central account chooser, so she'll click sign in, she'll see list of accounts, she'll click her picture. The next thing she will see is a Google OAuth or OpenID consent page saying, Joanna, do you want to confirm your identity to this website? And she says, what the hell, Eric? I just went in the website and clicked the picture of myself with my name and email. Of course I want that information to go to that site. So, she continues to ask me, why the hell are we asking the same thing twice? Now we've done UX testing here, time and time again, for over a year, and we get the same thing. Naveen, did you have a question?
I just want to mention that's only the first time.
Correct.
Right? Not on the second time, it's one time.
Right. And it's the same
For each website.
Right. And the same type of thing is true of Facebook, Microsoft, AOL, etc. It used to be in the past, some of us IDPs made it worse, and every time you went to the website again, you had to consent again. I think all of us have stopped doing that. However, so my wife complains about this. Now the browser ID guys made the claim that their approach did not have this problem. And user experience-wise, that is true. You go to a site, you click browser ID sign in, you see browser ID account chooser, you click an email address there, and the next thing you see is you are logged into the site. So they don't have the double consent page problem. The way that they did it is their central account chooser would, after an account was selected, it would make some protocol requests to the identity provider and say, okay, this user is giving consent to this relying party, please now do some protocol stuff, and the end result is the website gets a digital assertion without the user seeing consent again. The actual protocol details, aren't particularly important here, but they would say that right now that is a functional advantage that their protocol has. I would agree, and I would say based on our UX testing, we need to find a way to achieve that same goal, or users are going to think there's a bug in the system. And so some of y'all may have heard me talking with John Bradley that we've been looking at a whole bunch of different ways to do this, and there are a lot of them. Unfortunately, as some of the security people will tell us in the room, a lot of them involve putting an incredible amount of power in the account chooser or equivalent domains. If you start setting powerful tokens to there that can be used to log into sites, and you allow that that domain to request, digital tokens for every site in the world, that's pretty dangerous. All of a sudden, that site becomes a big vector for attack. So what we've looked at instead, and it's not finalized, we need to, bang away on more security-wise, is the idea that when the user is on a central account chooser and picks an account, what can happen is the central account chooser, before redirecting back to the site, it loads an iframe to the identity provider. The identity provider is given the email address of the selected account and is given the URL that the account chooser is about to redirect back to. And it tells the identity provider, please remember that this user is consented to giving their email address to this site. That iframe is then closed. Central account chooser redirects back to the website as normal. The website redirects back to the identity provider using SAML, OpenID, OpenID Connect, etc. And as long as the identity provider remembers that the user is given this consent, it can avoid, as he said the first time, showing the consent page. It can avoid my wife, complaining or these users complaining. And so, but the other nice result is a user, goes to the site, even if they never visited before, they just click their picture and they're logged in. So this document, the two-click consent flow, is a much longer document that describes a couple of different ways we've considered doing this, what we think are attack vectors for different ones. It's not finalized, but one of our security experts has had a chance to look through it and thinks the approach right now is viable, and we just need to flesh out some of the details. I'm hoping either this audience can find holes in it or suggest another technique, but it is a usability problem that we need to solve.
So, Eric,
Yep.
I mean, it is possible that the account chooser could sign a token that had the email address in it that was passed along as a hint showing the identity provider that the user had already given the email address to the relying party, so the identity provider doesn't need to ask for consent again without giving the account chooser complete control over minting access tokens for the user?
Yep. That's one of the options in there, and in fact, that's almost the description of browser ID, almost.
Well, browser ID, the token also says that you are that person.
That is true. You're talking about what is sent back to the RP as opposed to what they send to the IDP. Yeah.
Right. So
their IDP
what goes back to the IDP or goes back to the RP and browser ID is a statement that you are that email address. Effectively, I'm proposing that the account chooser send a hint that you've already given that email address to that relying party. So if you happen to be that user, the IDP can see that you've pre-consented to giving that email address without.
Yep. I don't disagree. The only problem is right now the account chooser holds no secret, so it doesn't have anything it can use to digitally sign. That's
but it could use its SSL key. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean that's the IDP to be able to use the hint would have to be able to know what the public key is.
Yep.
What's the downside of? I mean, somebody impersonates and sends a hint that's not right. There's really not a lot of security downside.
That is our conclusion. That if you are a hacker who's taken over the accountchooser.com, you probably can't do anything evil as long as ID tokens don't flow through you. If all you can do is make requests up to an IDP, the most you can do is take an email address that you already have access to and ask a website to send it, to another website.
But the session isn't controlled by you.
Correct.
Pretend somebody has a session.
Right. So, agreed. Whereas browser ID actually is a little bit more dangerous because the ID tokens do flow through it. So if it gets compromised, it's a bit more scary. So that's one where I like that. I want to go through the document. But let's assume for a moment we do find a way to reasonably make it work. It has this nice property that take that, what we funny enough call two-click consent flow, combine it with the Kaha stuff we showed at the beginning. This now means a user can go to a website that they've never visited before in their life, see the list of accounts, and with a single click be logged into it. Right? Without Kaha, you have to go to a site, First thing you have to do is click the sign in button, then you have to click your account, then you have to click the consent button, and heck, if you have an existing account there with a password, unless it can, map the two, now you have to type your password to bind the two accounts together. So a lot of sites today, moving from password to federated login, it's 4 steps. If you're a business guy who doesn't understand the details, 4 steps seems like a lot. If instead, you tell the website, okay, the user opens your site and clicks their picture, and that's it. It's a lot easier for websites to migrate from password-based login to, generating a ping-type process. So, we both solve a reasonable usability complaint, but also as a nice side effect, simplify the login process about as much as we can. Yep, Winter?
Can I ask a question on
Sure.
the previous point you made about the double approval?
Sure.
So when a website gets back from the picture, the reason they are seeing the users see that
if that website takes that hit and starts
with the ID. But if the website when starting the OpenID handshake includes the information it got already, then the IDP knows that it has the information already anyway.
Except right now, the information the account user are unsigned claims. Anyone could actually add, you could add Bill Gates at Microsoft.com to your own account user fairly easily using AC-F.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is the IDP should still authenticate that you are in Java.com.
Correct.
But then it sees that,
but how does it know?
It needs, so
well, that's another one, right? Yeah, ignore the central account user, but the site already has the email address that you're logged into. Why not just send it back?
Yeah, exactly. So
right.
Would it automatically detect that and just not show
there are some IDPs who have chosen to work that way. I think Google would probably be unfairly break through the news if we did, but I wouldn't disagree with doing it personally. Right? So a bunch of enterprise IDPs, I don't know if everyone heard this, but a bunch of enterprise IDPs work that way. They use it for single sign-on between systems. All right, so that was two-click connect. Okay, so I want to stay on the two-click thing for a minute, and let's see, who's our audience here? So this might mostly be Pat McGregor and a little bit of Amy. So how many people know what InSick is? Come on, go ahead. Amy? Oh my God! Oh, you're so lucky. InSick is the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace that Obama signed a year ago. Where he said the U.S. government will not be an identity provider. All we're going to do is write down the rules for how websites should be identified as online parties, or at least that's how many businesses who are not sophisticated have choose to interpret it. So it's created the unfortunate marketing problem marketing committee talks about, that there are many websites out there who we probably could convince to buy a generating type product, but who are sitting on the fence because they feel like, oh wait, we have to wait for the rules to be applied. That is not an accurate statement of what InSick is supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, that type of flood gets created. One of the particular sources of flood that gets created, to be honest, now it will be a bit more difficult, is from privacy advocates who don't understand how this stuff works. And frequently inaccurate claims are made about limitations of the approaches, technologies, etc. One of the privacy complaints that does come up from some of the people actually relates to the problem we see where a user goes to the website, clicks the Google button or Facebook button, and ends up logged into the wrong account and doesn't realize. That's a reasonable privacy complaint. The problem has existed for a while. The account user does help with that. Another one that comes up is, hey, OpenID requires that the identity provider remember what websites you visit. Therefore, it remembers that you visited this porn website and this AIDS, clinical trial matching website. That's also a technically incorrect statement. There's no reason that identity providers technically are required to store in their server-side logs what websites you visited. Most of them do so to avoid the re-consent process. They want to avoid every time you go back to the same site asking the same question. However, interestingly, with the two-click consent flow, you have the potential as an identity provider to choose to not store server-side. what websites the user went to. Just keep that information in the cookie on the browser for the sort of temporary login flows. So one of the things that is, been suggested is for us as a community to actually build a identity provider that by default has some of these configuration modes that would make some privacy advocates happier and show them that it can be achieved with the same technology that is available today, and they don't need to wait for some other magic technology that someone is trying to sell them up their creek with. One of the other pieces of this, and the browser ID folks do recently talk about this one, is let's say you went and you built such an identity provider and it had all this great privacy features and it had a great UI, etc. There would generally be no reason for a website to trust this, let's call it a bridge IDP, to assert a Hotmail address or Yahoo address or Gmail address, because it's not Gmail, it's not Yahoo, it's not AOL. And so a relying party, even if it gets one of these assertions, has to make the user jump through a bunch of other hoops to prove that they do in fact own that email address. So one of the things the browser ID guys did as part of their protocols is said, hey, why don't we have this bridge IDP literally be a bridge between an upstream identity provider, like an email provider, and a relying party. And whenever a user consented to use their identity as a bridge IDP to log into a site, what would actually happen during the flow is the bridge identity provider would go up to the user's email provider and say, dude, give me a signed blob that proves that Eric Sachs, the Hotmail user, is at this computer. Great, I've got it. Now let me pass on an assertion to this relying party that says, hey, it's bridge IDP user 64, but here's also a digitally signed token from Yahoo saying that it's, Tom at Yahoo type of thing. And that would address some of the, otherwise usability complaints.
Would you have to have another consent step there?
For the, which part?
For passing in the blob from Google or Yahoo or whoever to the bridge identity provider?
So now this becomes a question for the OpenID Connect group. John Bradley was mentioning he was just standardizing how a check ID immediate flow might enable one website that you said can constantly check that you're still signed in to invisibly get additional ID tokens with new timestamps that say who you are. So imagine the bridge IDP did nothing more than repeat that dance to confirm you were still logged in, grab the ID token that came, encapsulate it in its own ID token, and now you have a chain of tokens. One token says it's bridge IDP user 34, and within it is an ID token that says the audience of this token is the bridge IDP, and it's for user frank at gmail.com, and it's from Gmail.
So essentially, it's very similar. Would it be very similar to some modes of a SAML proxy, PAM?
Exactly. Right.
God help us.
And exactly. But I believe the claim is anyone could build a bridge IDP that is an OpenID Connect IDP and is itself an OpenID Connect RP, and could enable basically anyone to use their identity at an OpenID Connect IDP to bridge through this guy in the middle and visit the porn website and the AIDS tracking website without their Facebook or Gmail IDP knowing where they visited.
The one rub with that is that we have to embrace asymmetric signatures. That we have to get around the symmetric signature problem. Then it all works much easier.
Oh yeah, magic. But
having a shared secret pair between the IDP and the relying party limits a lot of privacy.
Yep.
And stops you from being able to do that in a trustworthy, do the bridge in a trustworthy way.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, John, there the hard part becomes if you want per RP IDs flowed through top to bottom of the system, as opposed to globally unique identifiers for the user.
Well, that's actually still doable, as long as you trust the bridge IDP to be able to provide some sort of reliable seed. We dealt with that in InfoCard, so there's existing thinking on it.
Yep. So I think we technically know how to do it. I'm not sure how many people would actually choose to always use such an IDP.
Well, is there really a market though? As soon as you have to pay for something?
Exactly. Right.
Well,
here's the question.
The problem is that relying parties want API access to your Google contacts or some other thing, that pretty much blows a hole in all of the theories that the identity provider won't know who you're talking to.
Right.
You know, it's one of these problems that's really a problem more in people's minds than necessarily in practice.
And so let me talk then about the marketing thing here. What if the value isn't that a lot of people use it? What if the value is that the existence of it and the possibility of being able to use it makes a lot more websites comfortable with becoming a relying party because they offer users the choice of doing this other thing. Users choose not to do it, that is fine. But I'd say many of us who have to deal with a particular East Coast audience and some other government audiences, you know, feel that inaccurate claims are made about, you know, our technical abilities, which are actually descriptions of marketing value proposition. And so it may be we are closer to creating a usable version of such a system. And, you know, for one, I'd love to convince some organization out there to run this, not because I think a lot of people would use it, but because I think the existence of it might actually help us reach the larger market. Right?
So I have a question.
Yep.
This isn't that?
Yeah, this is Nat Sakamura. People don't know he's our director of the OpenID Foundation and with NRI in Japan. Sorry, Nat.
So just one question. This proxy IDP thing sounds a lot like aggregated claim provider in terms of Connect.
Yes, I would agree.
Is that, yeah, so I just wanted to confirm that.
Yep. And I think any identity provider, especially with OpenID Connect, has the potential to do that. I would just say that's a very accurate description of the primary job of such a bridging IDP.
Right. So essentially, that wants to be able to run on a stateless thing like account chooser, or be able to be a user agent in the extension in the user's browser to where they want to do the aggregation themselves.
Yep. Cool. So one of the other things I wanted to point out, and John, now I'm going to go back to a point you made in a minute, which is we just created this thing called OpenID Connect, which great technology, I would claim even more valuable from a marketing perspective that everything is on top of OAuth. There's this interesting point, though, that if websites start leveraging this, what I call two-click consent flow, that can only be used to get basic identity information about a user. Basically what we used to do in OpenID V2, email address, identifier, and nothing else, not access to like the user's friends list. If a website wants to do that, it is going to have to bounce the user back to that service provider with a request for that specific scope. So I would make the technical claim that relying party websites who leverage this two-click flow might start to find that they have actually separated their authentication element of the user, what we used to call OpenID V2, from the API access part, the OAuth part, and actually do them at different points, technically speaking, in the flow, which also has the ability to improve some other UX problems that we see sometimes. For example, once a user is logged into a site, the site might be able to look up and say, oh, you know, this is a user for which I don't want to ever try to get access to their address book, or this is one where I always want to, or this is one where I've already gotten access to it, but it expired, you know, or a bunch of other things. Right now, one of the complaints we find from Google, people who do these OpenID Connect flow and hybrid flows, is they're just throwing someone blindly at us. No idea, do they have a Google account, do they don't? You know, is it someone who's used that site before or have not? Is it someone who's used the site before and has consented or hasn't consented? And all the hard work is dumped on the service provider. Within it just has this simple, you know, consent page with a yes or no button and doesn't have a lot of subtlety to it. Here I think we might be able to open ourselves up to a little bit more flexibility and nimbleness with how actually our consent works, for example. But just something to keep in mind. So the next two bullets are more homework for people who are not here. The OpenID Connect group has work on things like session management, discovery, and dynamic registration, things which exist in OpenID V2. funny enough, a lot of our testing we've done more with OpenID v2 than OpenID Connect because it works better with these features. You can support more identity providers, for example. So I'm certainly hoping that some of this stuff might spawn the community into doing more with these protocols. I, for example, have a list that I've kept of mostly international email and social network providers around the world who have wanted to become identity providers and have just felt it wasn't worth it because they never figured their button would end up on the Yahoo login box. Now we're starting to see that, oh my gosh, with this account user, all they have to do is at login time on their site, put the user in the central account user, and they're in great shape. Except that, they would need to have the ability for websites to do dynamic discovery and registration with them. No one's going to manually register with every single IDP out there in the world. So right now, I think we're in this chicken and the egg thing. The identity providers, potential identity providers aren't there yet, so we haven't stabilized all these specs and proved them out. But at the same time, they're waiting for these specs to be stabilized and proved out before they come. So thank you to the Johns and the Nats and the Pams who are working on these things. And I'm certainly hoping to get Google a little bit more involved in that in the future. Let me now then go down to a more specific question that some of these potential identity providers have asked me. When you get to smaller potential identity providers, they tend to be less technically sophisticated. In fact, many of them don't write a lot of their own technology. They go and say they're big email providers who start with letter C, who buy their technology from a big vendor here whose name starts with P, to run a lot of their identity framework. And so they ask around for how hard is it to, for example, run an OpenID or OpenID Connect identity provider. And the answers they tend to hear are, it's actually pretty hard, especially, for example, to keep the state information between data centers about registered clients, registered secrets, what consent information users have given, etc. So one of the homework items that I think it would be interesting for us to consider, and we're going to think about, is if we do have dynamic registration, if we have dynamic discovery, theoretically there is no need for those websites to store any server-side state about clients. And what if those identity providers, they only support two-click consent flows, or consent flows where they don't try to remember, that you've already given consent. If they do that, I would make the claim that potentially they need no server-side storage at all.
That's probably going to be we have to figure out how to deal with OAuth, refresh tokens, etc.
Only if you're trying to get API access as opposed to just email.
So I think that Connect can be completely stateless. I think that we still have a ways to go to deal with how OAuth itself could be stateless where you're dealing with refresh tokens.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think it would be worth us figuring that out because if it really is stateless, I would say the most extreme version of that is if a website wants to be an identity provider, they need a single web page with some standard JavaScript on it, and they need server-side logic that can convert their session cookie into an audience-scoped ID token.
Right. So, I mean, to get what you want, we have to deal with token revocation as opposed to refresh.
So if all you're sending is ID tokens and not access.
Well, you take it, George.
Well, no, I was just going to agree. Those are the thoughts that were running through my brain, is that you still have to deal with out-of-band token revocation.
And revocation of tokens that can do what?
Access your portable contacts. You still want to have a way for the user to go to the Google site and click on something to remove a particular relying party from having access to.
Right. I'm targeting potential identity providers who have no plans to offer API access.
Right. So it's much easier if they don't have API access.
Right.
Then we pretty much know how to do that.
So on this bullet, the part in parentheses says no API access. So,
but even if you're just doing authentication, right? There could be times where you want to kill the existing logged in session, right? Potentially out of band. And how do you basically break that from working other than just letting it expire. So I mean, you have very
sign-out problem, right?
Right.
And I think there again, if you're not trying to, if you know, again, our basic way that we've talked about doing it, which relies on the aligned party techniques, is it gets an ID token and it uses it to issue a session on its side that it only treats as valid as for X number of minutes, and every X number of minutes it does a check ID immediate back to the identity provider to make sure the same user is still logged in there. That identity provider can perform that check again with the same logic that's stateless.
Right. So I mean, we have the problem that the front channel doesn't work very well if the browser goes away.
Correct. Right. Now, again, that of course assumes that the relying party wants to even participate in such a single sign-on, which we haven't traditionally found to be broadly the case, but some do want to do that. So I think we would want to try to find a way to enable it for the sites that want to do. But you get I would say, a very simple opportunity. So I think we could help attract a larger number of websites, you know, or again, just basic email providers around the world as an example, to help their users get out of the password management business if we could make it this simple to become an identity provider. Again, I'd say the more complex pieces probably are whatever we do with discovery and dynamic registration for these ID tokens.
Yeah, I guess if it's an email provider that has a very widely geo-distributed environment, right, then it could be somewhat problematic. But otherwise, it seems like standing up a simple session store as part of the additional work that you're doing would not be a substantial amount of work given the other code that's going to have to be written.
Yeah,
right.
I'm pretty embarrassed to talk with some of these guys and find out how hard they think that is. I don't know if Pam's been asked to talk with some of them. Yeah, trying to get them even multi-home email storage seems to be beyond their capabilities.
All right, so unfortunately, at least Nat and I are going to have to go to the other call now.
Yep. Anyways, we're nearly at the end. You guys can look at the rest of the stuff, and I'll be sending notes on the agenda, but absolutely appreciate you guys' time, John and Nat.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Cool.
Well, I'll see you next Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, that worked out. And Nat, I'll see you too. So yes. Only 4 more suggested bullets in the agenda. We've made pretty good use of time. Let me skip the first one because that's a little bit more detailed. I'll actually sort of start towards the bottom. So, you know, the next meeting for people who choose to participate is probably and tentatively going to be in late April, maybe the week of April 23rd, up in the Seattle-Portland area. And Pam and Greg in particular, I'm hoping you guys can take that, and I got to contact Victor about whether we might be able to do a joint trip up there, both for a technical working group meeting and to go to Portland for a meeting with the Class 4 about the status of the website. And if there are other people here who think they'd be interested in participating, let me know. If there are other people who think they'd be interested in participating and couldn't get up to Seattle and Portland but would be willing to VC from here, I'd love to know that via email as well to help see if Microsoft could do either video conferencing between the Redmond and Mountain View campus, or potentially for us to make the decision to do it up in Google's Seattle campus and down here and do video conferencing between the two that way as another option. And if, you know, that week of the 23rd, if there are particular days that people want to attend would be interesting, please let me know. We'll do that via mail. So the last 3 are, like, say, the update from Google. Let me, you know, go into that one, and then we'll just take these bullets out of order since we're making the time. So I've mentioned a couple of times that Google has had this account feature deployed, you know, for a while. I showed you guys that we are going to be refining UX for it a little bit. Hopefully Chuck, who is our UX guy who just ran away, is finishing that up right now. It's currently our goal, either next week or the following week, to turn it back on again for all Google employees. We turned it off a few months ago on purpose so we could turn it on again for everybody to see what supplies we generate. Also, we've added a couple thousand employees so we have more people to test with. So we're going to do that for all Google employees. What we're then going to start doing, and some of you might see it, is in US English on our login page. There'll be a little promo down at the bottom for potential people that says, wouldn't you like to try our new login box? If they click that, they'll be opted into the same account user experiment that's been available for a while, and then they will see this refined UI. At the start, we will not be using the central account user. We don't have that code done. We're still using the local one. But we're going to get out the local account user and see what feedback we get from users. Then over time, we're basically going to be turning up the percentage of people that we show the promo to. Roughly, we find that over a given week, 1% of the people who see these promos opt into it. So it is our hope that in the next 2 or 3 months, show the promo to 100% of people and get 1% of our 2 billion users using the account user. If we could get good results in that set, we'd be confident enough we could probably take this to everyone. The next decision Google is trying to make is, do we turn it on for everyone when we're still on the local account user? Or do we wait till the central account user is available so that we can bootstrap it for the larger value we believe it will bring the ecosystem? We don't have to make that decision now. That's a decision that's coming in the future. But that's where we are with the Google one. The other thing that Google has is this thing called the Google Identity Toolkit, roughly equivalent to January and Green and now Ping 1's offering, but more basic. The current version of that is a local account user only and only supports email IDPs. As of this week, Wing-Ching, I'm not lying, right? As of this week, it does support the central account user, the account user.biz. All they have to do is go in and just change the configuration parameter in their JavaScript, and they can actually start using it. And we're looking at one-time back from London, figuring out how to announce that to our user base. Now, because it's on accountuser.biz, .com, we're not going to suggest that websites roll this out in production, but there are obviously websites out there who want to experiment with the central account user. We're going to tell them, fine, use this, play around with it, see how it works, help create more market demand. And we've started to fish food internally at Google, our second version of the Google Identity Toolkit that does support non-email identity providers to make sure that that works with the central account user. However, if you played with the demo sites, you'll notice that it does support identity providers like Google and Microsoft and Facebook, et cetera, that are non-email IDPs. So that's actually been live for a while, and you can play with it and functionally see that that is working and see how the two work together.
I have a question about that. Originally, when this whole thing kicked off, you were email providers only, and that, of course, made email address the only primary index you were willing to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you've moved away from that, are you willing to consider moving or taking less of a hard line on absolutely having to have email address sign in?
So on GitKit itself, the Google Identity Toolkit itself, we made the decision to only target that at websites. We want to make sure there is at maximum one account in their system for a given email address, so that if someone calls up the help desk and says, I'm frank@gmail.com, they find one entry for the user. That is a limitation of our product that we are choosing to do on purpose based on the market feedback that we've gotten. To be honest, the largest source of feedback from that has been through the 25 companies that Google has acquired and merged their login systems with ours. Theoretically, that group should be a simpler group to have gotten rid of their existing passwords. One IDP, no help desk costs. However, on average, those migrations take a year. If the reality is that websites with significant password-based login systems need to take a year to get out of the password business, I don't think anybody will ever do it. And Google has to give large financial rewards for acquisitions to cause them to take this painful path. We believe, based on our experimentation, we can drastically cut that work down to potentially a point where they don't need to write much code at all. The service just handles it, by itself. But in our experience, we found that if you enable there to be more than one account per email address, and you're a business who has a help desk, the combination of the two, you're going to regret it. If you don't have that customer-facing help desk that people call, then it's fine. It hurts some people out others, but it's just a limitation.
I'm happy to, even if it's a 1-to-1 ratio. There are just a lot of our customers where their entire corporate culture is based around a login ID that isn't an email address. Right?
User.
Yeah, username. So just the ability to, if it's a limitation of GitKit, but not a limitation of account user, then that frees up companies like ours to still use account user, but stay away from the email address. Because so for some of our customers, email is considered PII, right? It's leakage of information. So,
and I don't think they should use this. I'm not sure how the central account user would help them, but a local account user, so the same example we were giving before, a fax probably will.
Well, central account chooser would be better, would it not?
Well, if they don't use the same username across multiple websites.
Well, they would if they were all corporate.
That may be true. Could be.
I think we talked about basically the local account user having a list of email addresses.
Well, but she's talking about another example that I don't think needs a local account user.
Well, it would basically be a combination of saying that this is the identity provider which is going to be a full account, and then they have those in the central account. It would work. I mean, I can walk through some of this.
What I would have suggested, I would say, use the central account user, treat it like Twitter's IDP, where the entries are username and identity provider domain name, not email address. And then that RP, when it sends up the central account user, says, here's the white list of IDPs I'm going to support, and it's only that one.
Yes.
Right? I think that would probably work.
So you're not validating that it has to be an email address, and that's going.
No.
Okay. So it really is just a field containing a thing that should be unique.
Yeah, one of these days, and it has been a part of, I'd like to actually put a Twitter button up there so people could play with it and see those entries of email, but we just haven't done that.
You know, that would be great. People, the feedback I get when I show this off is email addresses don't work for us, and they just write out the whole thing.
Well, maybe you could help me demo.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so that's what we are doing. So then the next one, Pam, is another suggestion that you had brought up, which is earlier we said, hey, it'd be great if we could provide the 4 steps for a website to deploy a central account, drop some JavaScript and plug in the sign-up page, and then make these 2 server-side changes. One of the things Pam has suggested is going a little bit further than that and providing some plugins for popular frameworks like Drupal, et cetera, where we could provide those 2 server-side pieces that need to be provided, as well as just embed the JavaScript in the login and sign up automatically, and tell websites, hey, if you're Drupal and you want to use switch accounts, here you go, boom. Where by default it doesn't do anything with being a relying party, it doesn't use generating PKR, or thing. Now, interestingly, one of the things to point out is if a website, or take Yahoo, Yahoo's already a relying party. There's nothing to keep a website who's already a relying party from layering the account chooser on top of it. The 2 pieces are actually completely orthogonal from each other. And I believe Drupal already has some standard RP plugin technologies, right? So a website could probably choose to turn on either the Drupal RP plugin or the central account plugin or both. And it probably would just work. But what that also then means, especially in the vendor opportunity, is if you're a vendor, you can then offer the either account chooser plus Janrain plugin, or the combo, if it helps do anything more, Janrain plus account chooser plugin as a way to acquire more customers. So this type of stuff where we're talking about getting open source contributions to start building some plugins could help us bootstrap the market and get more websites to actually get the account chooser to start, but then get their appetite wet to then jump to becoming a relying party.
You said there were some open source things underway, right?
Well, the ones that we know of are the ones that are already on the Google Identity Toolkit. Like, some people like the local account chooser thing with the Google Identity Toolkit, and like we're in the fight with the Drupal guy, right, who's trying to create his own plugin. So there's already potentially some starting points there. I'm not picking them up to know if any of them are any good. My guess, given our experiences with the OpenID open source libraries, is the best ones are going to be written by the vendors who want to offer it to help bootstrap customer acquisition. And then we'll get a few people like John Bradley and that guy up at Microsoft who's not part of their identity team who works on the .NET version of OpenID.
Oh, yes. Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew Arnott. Right? They're very few people, but maybe we can attract more. Right? Cool.
You said there was somebody doing WordPress?
Was the WordPress us, or was that...
We wrote the WordPress.
We had a contractor that is not around anymore, but, and I guess, have we already open sourced those historical code bases? I can't remember what we did. Did we publish them but not open source? Or, you can check with the team, but like, we basically, the hard part of integrating WordPress with Google Identity Toolkit was the account chooser part, not the federation part. So I think if you took that and ripped out some pieces, it'd probably be a good first start. And if we didn't already open source code, I'm sure it'd be up range.
We have some more one card.
Yeah, aren't you already a Drupal contributor? Yeah, you contributed to Drupal plugins? Yeah, so we should have you contribute to the next one. Cool. So the last one, and then certainly open to other agenda topics if people have it, is there's a document at the bottom where it says future features, where I have just made a list of either all the features that I've heard people in this room and other community members ask for that we could potentially add to it. I thought I'd scan through them quickly in categories, but not in detail, and people might be able to suggest others. However, in my opinion, and I'm going to underline in my opinion, these are almost all at this point features that could come after a launch as optimizations, as opposed to things that I've previously felt were features we had to have before launch. So there's some stuff that is just translation. So as you might guess, given our team was based in Beijing, we already have translation working for the core interface for the central account user. But we want to make sure that the in-user Learn More page itself is actually translated. And that page has more text than the entire rest of the account user by itself. Similarly, we want to make sure that if the user ends up on the home page of a site that's using the account user in Kaha, that there's a way for them to change the language there. And Roy is playing with this now. We'll eventually find a way to do this. On the marketing side, Pam brought this up before. We need to decide what we will do if someone visits accountuser.com and the account list is empty. Okay. I believe that we need to figure out some solution to this two-click problem so users don't complain about the double consent flow. And then one of the recent ideas that has come up is not every website is going to immediately redirect its homepage to central account user, like YouTube would not. And so today they would need to have some sign-in button a user would press to bounce them to the central account. One of the things I think Penn and Greg were part of this was we're trying to figure out how to visually make that sign-in button indicate to the user that, hey, this is one of those great sites that uses the central account user, and we're looking at having like a visual consistent button. One of the ideas that came up was for us to provide, in broad technical terms, that I don't even know if they're right, a sign-in button that is basically an iframe to the central account user. So say the sign-in button has very small pictures down at the bottom of the accounts that are already in the account user. So the user could go to a site and say, well, damn, it must support that thing because it's already got my little picture there. Not, trying to cause the user to click a tiny picture on the button. They still have to click the full button to go to another website to actually pick an account, right? So those are the things that right now I think are very nice to have / required before we launch. The next set that I would say do not fit in that category are support for account mismatch states. So it is possible, for example, for a user to go to a website that uses central account user, pick, for example, a Gmail address of the husband, and if the wife happens to be logged into Gmail on the computer, it is possible to still get logged in as the wife to the account, even though it chose the husband. Okay. Somewhere in the logic, you need to say, oh, well, the user on the central account user chose Frank at gmail.com, but Google asserts it's Sarah at gmail.com. That's not right. And show an error message, to the user. Still trying to figure out, is this something we can do without work by the website, or does the website need to do work? The next one is one where I'd like to poll and get people's opinions, because right now it's about a quarter one way, a quarter another, and half unknown. You can have a vote too, which is, should people be able to directly go to www.accountuser.biz and manually add and edit entries? Or what we have today, all they can do is delete entries there. If they want to add them or edit them, they have to do so by going to a site that integrates with the central account user. The general feeling is it's a power user feature for people to go there and edit stuff manually. It's sort of like going in and editing the list of cookies you have in your browser, but it'd be technically not. So how many people would claim that's a quite nice feature to have? Okay, How many of you have computer science degrees? You go straight to the hand. Okay, so 4. And how many people are willing to put up their hand and say, delay it and do other things first? Okay, there it is. Okay.
I mean, there are very, very few people who try to add entries. I think the deletion is what is on anything is maybe one concept. So I think, in my opinion, we want to keep the JavaScript for potential account user as minimal as possible, and it does fewer things. And that is probably going to be more of the driving force for features we have.
Yeah, adding an edit would be a lot of value.
Select a position that is coordinate to change your tag.
Which we already have right now. We have the deletion function. Select. Yes, select. You can delete a particular entity.
Now, do you want to do that?
Undo is you have to re-add again. Click add another count.
Well, you can't add. It's really straightforward. I mean, it's not too hard to add that.
Now, that someone raised an interesting one. We talked about this local account user for a while. One of the value propositions we mentioned for this is a website that started out with a local account user and later version with a account user. Another one is in Google. There's a feature called multiple login. How many people notice where you can be logged into 2 Gmail accounts at the same time? Right?
Yep.
Like personal and corporate or 2 personal. Well, the way Google does this is in a cookie on that domain, we remember the accounts that you've used. And so Google already today has a very lightweight local account. Well now, up in the central domain, you have the central account user. Unfortunately, one of the things that we know is going to be a pain in the butt to do is to figure out, well wait, if you go manually to the central account user and delete the account, how do you communicate that information to a site that has it in its local account user? Because more than likely, the next time you go back to the site that has it in its local account user, you go there, you click the Find It button, it's going to take the list of accounts in its local account user, and it's going to shove it back up to the central account user. The user's going to go, whoa, what the hell, I thought I killed that now. Solving that is possible. We have ideas, Ben, right, on how we think we can do it, but it won't be easy. Some people have some ideas on just making the site infrastructure faster. John Bradley mentioned a few of these. We've mentioned some optimizations we might do on the account selector page. We mentioned that there are people like George who are going to have more than 4 entries in their account selector. They'll have 20, so you might sort by frequency. You might hide some that almost never used. You might remember the last one used on a particular website. Those are all potential optimizations that we could use. We've also been trying to figure out if there are other tweaks we should do to the user experience for non-email IDPs. However, I can't get any usability data on that because every time we do user testing and it's a non-email IDP, everybody just goes to their photo and clicks their photo and clicks their photo. Nothing else seems to matter. So that's why right now you notice Facebook.com or Google.com is there, it's written, but it's sort of minor. But Jen, you guys play a lot more in that space than we do. You guys might be able to come up with something. Other requests we've gotten is for the account chooser to store not the URL to a photo, which is what it does today, because sometimes the URL of the photo can be used to find other public stuff about the user. At the end of the day, it has to be public stuff, so it's not really like much of a leakage. But one idea that's been suggested is that central account users store the photo as in HTML5 storage itself and return it that way. Seems a little heavyweight, but it's a suggestion. Another one has been to include more information in the account entries in the CDS, in particular preferred languages, rough age category, gender, and citizenship, just because those are some of the most frequent other things that websites ask for at account sign-up time. And if those were just passed through automatically, there would be less need for users to do it. However, the other alternative that some people talk about is techniques like WebFinger and others, where a user could just choose to publicly on their profile make that information discoverable as well. And that might serve the same purpose without the central account user needing to do anything.
Just one quick comment there. I mean, that goes in large part to what Nat was saying about being a claims aggregator. And I guess if you don't mind all that stuff being public, right, it doesn't matter for the account chooser to store it. But if you've solved the two-click problem anyway, right, between the account chooser and the IDP, right, the site could leverage that mechanism to get the additional claims from the IDP in a potentially, more privacy-protecting way than having that data just stored at the account chooser.
Yeah, that's true. That's a third approach. I like that. The next ones are things we talked about before. The second bullet being most silly guys have some ideas about JavaScript APIs for the OS and browser to read entries out of the central account chooser or add entries in, as well as trying to better optimize browser autofill on Safari and IE. And then, as it's come up a few times here, we are optimizing the privacy and UX using some fancy features of the browser, Caja, HTML5 storage, SNI, and so we need to make sure we do a good job of fallback. The fallback scenario is always just fall back to the existing login page the website has today. They always have to continue to have that. This is just a layer on board. So right now we've been trying to take a whitelisting approach, only for the whitelist of browser OS configuration parameters that we believe work. Do we use the CDS, and otherwise we fall back. But it may well be that we are not supporting some combinations that actually do that, right? Or there may be, as George pointed out, there may be some scenarios where we're missing, where things are turned off, and we just need to do a better job of checking. So those are all the known feature requests that I've heard. I've taken a couple more today, but most of the ones I've heard today are more, we can call them marketing and samples, and more for the marketing community in some ways than the working group itself. But this is a document that's public. Anyone can go and comment about this and add others, or maybe get interested in contributing, to actually work on some of these. Other than that is the entire suggested agenda for today, and I think we've been going for, 3.5 hours?
So one more, I mentioned this earlier, but somehow I'm a little worried about, for those of us who have customer care centers and the customer calls up and says, I'm having a problem doing XYZ, totally unrelated to sign in an account. And that, the first thing the customer care rep says, well, please go to your browser and click down here and click that button that says clear everything, right? Yep. And when it does that, your account chooser data is gone.
Yep.
And then the user goes back and they click the sign in button, and the thing's empty, and they don't know what to do, and they've been using it for a year, and they're not quite sure how the stuff got in there in the first place. So somehow in this that thing you talked about, being able to sort of push data into the account chooser or whatever, right? I could see someone, at least if we enabled that at the beginning, to write a simple browser plugin that saved all of that stuff physically in the browser outside of local storage, and could basically sort of push it into the account chooser as necessary, or something. But I think that's something we're going to have to make sure that we cover.
And that's one of the things we've been trying to evaluate with, like I said, Google's use of a local account chooser. That's already the case for us. We have seen a few instances of that being even reported in our AdWords customer support center. We are interested if, for example, the Chrome sync identity features could do what you've described. However, at least so far, statistical comparison, it hasn't come up as a significant issue. And in fact, it's so overwhelmingly helped users, especially users who didn't remember what their email address is on Google, that the pros have so drastically overweight the cons that we consider acceptable. I'll be very interested to see, as we more broadly roll this out across Google, how the stats end up skewing. But right now, as they just in the reductions of account recovery, and I forgot my email address type of thing, has been the overwhelming positive part. And certainly, as Google gets more data over the next few months, I will be as public about it as I can.
Sure. No, I totally get the benefits. I'm just thinking it would be nice if we could figure out a way to sort of help users. Even if it was as simple as go to this website over here and click a button and archive your account list so that if you ever end up there and it's empty, click this one over here and we'll reload it for you.
Yep. As long as at least we as the working group start by defining APIs where browser OS extensions can push in and pull out, then I think to your point, the help desk can tell the user, hey, first go to this special site we have, install our extension, it will save the important stuff, and now go and clear everything.
I completely agree. As long as we have the APIs, we should be able to work around it for the people who run into it.
Cool. Great. So those are my, suggested agenda items. Let's see, George, since I'll pick on you and Yahoo. I think you guys are more representatives of both RPs and IDPs as opposed to technology vendors. You have your own opinions about UX problems you see as a relying party and as an identity provider. Are there other big UX concerns you have here about where this might hurt as opposed to help, either as a relying party or identity provider?
I think I could see for us, some of the sign-in UI experience we'd want to potentially keep common across AOL, and it might not be exactly what this central account chooser would be, but I don't think that would stop us from being able to leverage the account chooser. I see a ton of value for us to be able to establish an identity in the account chooser and leverage that identity in a number of places across our sites. The third-party cookie issues I ran into would make me think that we might need to start out with the local plus central kind of approach, just so that we could ensure that across our set of sites that there's a consistent, and we can get to it no matter what the user's done to their browser, but still push the data into the central account chooser so that if they end up on some other site, right, hopefully the majority of them would get the good experience for those sites that support it. But I think in many cases controlling what the login page, the marketing text on the login page, but even more than that, styling it at some level, more than what I saw today anyway, is a pretty big thing. And I'm not sure that at least initially people would be too excited about moving their marketing page outside the bounds of the company.
Yeah, I think even within Google, where we searched around, there's still about 6 teams who are going to keep full-page marketing pages with the sign-in button and not try to mix marketing and an account chooser in the same page. The vast majority are extremely happy with mixing them for increased sign-in rates, but especially the services that work well for non-logged-in users. They want to make sign-in an option, not a almost required-ish looking thing.
Right, and I think that if you have a local environment, a local one as well as the central one, right, you could effectively get that same main page area with the account chooser for the local parts and pick up the other, if they click, a different account or something else. So I need to do a lot more exploration. I'm just, obviously I've been following it a long time, but need to really dig into the nitty-gritty of what's feasible and not feasible. But overall, it's one of the things have been, wishing I could convince people at AOL. I would have done it, slightly differently, 5 years ago, but this is great. I mean, it's this kind of thing, something that is in the user's face that basically says, hey, you already have something that works here. And that, in my mind, has been a huge missing piece in wide adoption of federation and the other things, within the industry as a whole.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, George. You want to, based on your experiences, what sort of things we're missing, or?
So, I have a basic question. So, to use the photo, right? Does it mean like the user has to make the photo public?
That's right. We said the current version, there has to be a public photo URL. And one of the questions is, should we have a HTML5 storage equivalent of that as an alternative for the person who doesn't want their photo URL to be public and instead just wants to get to the site? We haven't implemented that. It could be done.
So currently, in the Gmail implementation, so because the user has to go through an opt-in process, right? So does it use that by going through the opt-in process, the user agrees to make the photo public?
Currently, all of we did a thing like 4 or 5 months ago where all of our photos were made public if they weren't already. So on next login, users were actually going your photo, almost all of them always were public, but the people who didn't have them public, we were told either we're going to remove it or you have to click here to let us make it public. So for Google, that's no longer a problem. But for other identifiers, it might be.
I'm not sure public is the right word. So you could actually return a URL which has a token in token.apt, and you can basically set. So all we need is a URL. Because the user is actually going to go through and give me basic information about the account. That doesn't really mean that URL is going to be to somebody by search or anything. So I think there is a slight difference. So even for Google account, we need to know what we call it encrypted ID to actually get your picture. Interestingly, that is public based on if you can share just your basic profile, then the picture is there. But otherwise, there is no reason not to be able to return a URL with some token in there.
Because my concern is like some malicious parties, they might they get the user's email address corresponding to the photo. At least in Yahoo case, the photo URL is kind of like so basically from the email address, Yahoo won't be able to detach the photo URL. It's not the user's private information.
Right. And that's why we want to at least force the user on the consent page to realize they are about to give that information to another site. That's half of it. But then you have to, as you say, technically ensure it only goes to the ones that the user authorized. So that's where we call it a capability URL. If it's a big long URL that you can't find from the user's email address, it is only given to the sites where the user explicitly took an action and said, that photo should go to that site. So, at least from our team, our privacy folks are happy with that aspect of it. We no longer use the long capability URLs, but we did, honestly, when this project started. Google did.
Yeah, so the next one that we have is so I'm not sure whether I need anything for the account chooser. So for the plan, so there is no fallback going back to the user password. Is there any fallback?
Yeah, that's actually the default mode. So I can show an example. If we're doing this at the beginning, let me bring this up. So here is a website that it actually has 3 different home pages. So here is its sign in today, where the website has never heard of the central account user and you have to log in with an email address and password. Here is that website adding the central account user, but nothing to do with federated login. I don't know why Page thinks it's in German. So the user sees this, they select an account, and all the site does is pre-fill the email address, and the user still has to type in the password. So when in Google's current account chooser experiment that is available, almost 100% of the people who use it only log into Google with a password. So actually, I would claim that the default way the account chooser works is with a password. And you have to jump through a bunch more hoops, as you guys have already done, to be able to make it work with federated login.
So basically, account chooser doesn't exclude the user.
Nope. All it does is it takes the email string and the identity provider string if it's available and gives it to the site. And the site is then supposed to look at its account registration database and determine, that's an email address, in Yahoo case, that's an email address that is mapped to a Facebook account, so let's start a dance with Facebook. Or, it's a Gmail address. We've never seen it before in our life, but hey, why don't we start a federation dance with Google? Or hey, it's a @RocketMail account, so let's ask the user for a password.
So basically, I thought that's like changing the translation of some framework. you treat it as a high priority one?
So
translation of the code line.
The translation is actually done for everything except the help page. So which one of these can I go to? Hey, go ahead, Ben. Does your test site, does that want me? Oops, I went to the wrong one. So if you just go down here and say language, I don't know, French. So, this interface is completely translated into some ridiculously large number of languages. The one that we want to translate is down here, this link that says learn more about this. Currently takes the user to a page that the text isn't translated. One of the things that I want to do, I haven't prioritized in these guys' places, getting the text translated is easy. We'll just submit that to our standard tools. What I'd like to do, which is a little bit fancy, but I think it's easy for us, is dynamically generate this visual on the page so that that word is in French if the user comes through. So I can't create translated version of the JPEGs of that, but I believe we can just dynamically generate this stuff on the fly using the exact same JavaScript. So that is in that list of must-have before launch. Translating this is I think the second must-have before launch. But the the core account chooser, like I say, already does do that.
Yeah, I think probably the last one I'm waiting for when our country login page to have that.
Right. Like I say, I would compare you guys to our YouTube or our analytics group. I'm not sure that the best option is to do this mix of marketing content and account chooser. I think you might do the thing that we're going to do, where we have a plan button, and what we're actually going to do is, based on our experience, is do very different things depending on whether there are entries in the account chooser or not. So one of the things we have the ability to do is a site can sort of pull the account chooser and ask, do you have any entries? Right? If not, what in Google's case, what we're going to do is we're going to show our current login page, complex marketing with, flash stuff, and on the right-hand side, we're going to show an email address password field, exactly what we've been doing for years. If instead we pull the central account chooser and we say, oh my God, there are entries there, but we've never on this computer before seen this person log in. Based on our experiments, we found that it is drastically increases sign-in rates if we show the central account chooser in there. So we are basically, in that point, we're going to show the central account chooser with reduced marketing, because we find we get a much higher percentage of people signed in, to the flow. So we just did, the rough experiments between them.
So basically, in that case, it would be like it's more beneficial to have higher sign rate than probably feel more messages.
Right. And again, it's up to the, up to the website to decide. And I would say in the case of companies like Yahoo and Google, who have lots of individual properties, some of our teams are always going to try to show the account chooser, mostly the services that only work when they log in. But a bunch of the others are going to do this two-form option. If the account chooser is empty, flash plus password. If the account chooser is full, then less marketing, plus this. And we'll be continuing to work with Kaha team, to enable people to do more and more advanced stuff on the right. Functionally, they can do pretty much anything you can do with JavaScript, flashes, etc.
So, hey, Eric.
Yeah, George.
How does the site figure out who's? Are they just figuring out how many entries are in the account chooser, or are they actually getting?
They just get whether it's empty or not.
Okay. So then they basically have to make a decision, and it could be that whoever the user clicks on when the account chooser is shown is somebody they haven't seen before, and at that point they'll have to figure that out.
Correct. Now there's another thing, George, that goes back to a even more advanced optimization you could do is if you're a website like Yahoo, if you store a local account chooser and you also have the central account chooser, one of the things that we believe is reasonable to do is to enable your site to invisibly, give some accounts to the central account chooser and say, do you have any more accounts than these that I already have? Oh, you don't? okay, well then my site is going to show a local account user with Flash. Right? That's a relatively sophisticated optimization, but you could do that type of thing if you want. And honestly, very quickly on any given machine, your local account user should have all of the entries, for a particular user.
Right.
Eric,
Yeah.
what's your level of comfort having centralized? So the number of sites are going to be holding other websites. I haven't looked at all the details. It seems that there's not a lot of moving parts here, but something can always break.
Yep.
And this is something that would be problematic if it breaks for a lot of sites. And I know that certainly, like in large organizations, when there's kind of one of those central services that breaks,
right.
Even when you have a lot of people on pages, etc., it takes a while to track down. So I'm actually curious about what's the level of comfort.
If Google is willing to do it, any other website would be willing to do it. I mean, here's an interesting thing. It was amazing how many websites were willing to become relying parties after they saw Yahoo had done it. And say, wow, Yahoo must feel that the reliability of Google and Facebook is so good that you don't need to have pages running around back and forth. And it honestly took us a while to get there. In this case, we think it's one thing to talk about it and theoretically prove it. It's another to actually do it. So I figure by Google actually using it, we will show that it is trustworthy. And to be honest, our login system at Google, it is the most reliable system at Google. It is more reliable than web services. It has less downtime than web services. And the engineers at SREs who work on it are the same ones. So it is those people who are helping look at the design of the system. And one of the reasons that we're making it purely run as client-side JavaScript is theoretically, with the caching properties, any given user's browser only needs to load the HTML file once and the JavaScript file once. And even if the entire backend somehow went down, everything is still cached in their browser. All the JavaScript, all the logic, it doesn't need to go back to a server. So there's not much to break. And even if it does break, it's only in fact like someone can install a new browser that day. So then the next thing is, okay, well, the system that serves up the HTML and the JavaScript need to be really reliable. Well, we've broken that into two pieces. I was going through it earlier. The way the JavaScript is served up is Google has this intense distributed redundant network for serving up very popular JavaScript files like jQuery. Not just to our systems, but we provide it as a public service to the world. We've put the JavaScript files there. So now we're just left with a couple of HTML files that need to be available. And there we said, to start, let's use App Engine because it scales up a lot of it. Now, there's nothing keeping Google technically, for example, putting those same HTML files on our CDN network because they're just static HTML files. But I'm trying to have this as a OIDF service, not as a Google thing. And so in a perfect world, to be honest, Yahoo or Microsoft would host those HTML files, or we all would, and we DNS Robin across each other, because we all have CDNs for that.
So I'm definitely not looking for a Yahoo membership. I'm just looking at as a Yahoo property, as we like, for example.
Who might rely on that?
There's probably a lot of comfort right now for Google, given that you've been operating this and you kind of have the keys.
We'll be more confident after we've used it for billions of users.
So now that when you're going to move this control kind of further away from you, I'm actually curious how much comfort you'll feel. Like the moment something bad happens, like who are you going to be calling? And what will be the
I think we will be, as soon as someone other than Google, like Yahoo or Microsoft, says they're willing to host a copy of the JavaScript, I think we will be pushing very hard for a round-robin type of system between them. I think we may even be pushing for a round-robin where the website or the browser can pass in its preferred location from which to get this, and say if you're using a Chrome browser, it might pass in preferred location to get it from this Google type of stuff for the stuff like this. But technically speaking, I've talked to my counterparts on the other parts of Yahoo and Microsoft. The description I hear is, a static HTML file that doesn't change its child's play.
It seems to be, yes.
It seems to be, but it's so much easier after it's actually run for a few months and not had any problems to say that.
Well, plus, it may be child's play to serve, but you still have to serve it reliably.
That's actually the part I was saying for them,
Yeah.
for those guys, it's child thing, but they operate at a different level than most of us do, including most of the rest of you. Jack?
We also want to make sure that you don't end up, so if you are talking to the API, it's never going to change.
Right, the change that's where you're more likely to break it. You're going to put down a new JavaScript file that's going to have a bug.
We know because jQuery ran for you know how to load
Right. So fortunately, right now we have a very small set of interfaces to the systems. So doing automated testing of frameworks, at least right now, is reasonable. To Naveen's point earlier, like if you start adding complicated editing functionality in here or more complex settings, all of a sudden, combinatorial explosion of the number of states that you have to test. So right now, reasonable testing, but it's one of the reasons I think we will probably want to constrain the feature set, not expand it. Right. Okay, cool. So I think that was the IDP representation. So now we'll hit the vendors. And Craig, since you're back, I can be me picking you. I can pick on Pam. Who's in the fun? Who should I pick on? But from your perspective, vendor side on our side. Although you guys offer an IDP offering too, right? What's that called again? Doesn't it use a different brand name? Helping websites be an IDP. So when both offerings, again, what other concerns do you have? Features maybe we need that we're missing, things we should prioritize that we're not.
Yes, but both internally and externally.
Right. Yep. I'm with that. I'm with that.
We don't have that exactly for that for people trying to do it.
Right.
We always get interest in people asking, so we certainly it's just kind of pushing their way.
That's the reason for marketing work group, right?
There you go.
Cool. Pam, anything else you think you covered?
I think the big thing is just, the NASCAR is not useful for us in the first place.
For yours?
Yeah, for our customer base, for enterprises. Our SP clients tend to be multi-tenant clients, right? And they're not interested in connecting to the 5 biggest social networks. So I think that this works, but I've never seen that. So I think the next thing to do is have concrete enterprise containment examples as well as social networks.
That was mostly discovery.
Yeah.
The protocol discovery piece, or the
Yeah, just go for the box.
yeah.
Yeah, that includes discovery.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, so I think if all the Hangout YouTube magic works. By the way, this will get converted into videos that you guys or other people can watch, and I will put notes on it. We'll try to schedule this next meeting. Hopefully, more of you guys will be participating in the mailing list, or maybe even with the coding. And we've still got some immediate stuff to do on just formally launching the AccountChooser.com technically, and then a couple of the immediate things to work on, like the translation and the marketing. I think those are our next steps. But other topics people want to talk about?
One side comment I wanted to make, just to speak the adaption and more use of it. I noticed that the industry is moving for the tablet as one of their key computing endpoints, and tablets are also evolving into multi-user endpoints where they allow you to log in as you and your device switches to your account. It's not there yet, but it's going to evolve. That makes the functionality of AccountChooser a little less expensive because now you're like in your own sandbox.
It'll be better in login. But yeah, it has been interesting. We've already seen us just because we do the outputs and the AccountChooser, service. We don't get as much usage on Android phones unless it's a like Google Voice for the device, unless it's a personal and work account on both keys, on the same device. On the tablets, we're seeing still more with the current numbers. We're seeing still more close family scenario feedback for the employees. But additionally, we're finding you only need 2 accounts to find the countries that are valuable. Almost everyone has a personal account. And as much as the enterprises would like to, we're not having much sex except getting employees to keep their personal account, work account, and separate OS level accounts or tablet level accounts. I'm not saying solving that one makes it solve our problems. Sure.
Yeah, so I think long profile is something that technical is kind of it's very hard. If you want to take users to say switch the platform account, then it doesn't happen. They don't do that. Like, if you have 2 accounts, you only look for 2 accounts, and you are in the market. Very few users do that. So it's very disruptive. That if you now look at low profile, like as soon as you change it, just went on.
Actually, just so people know what that is, can you see that up there? So I'm in Chrome, and I'm going to click the little spaceman head up there, and look, it's an account chooser. It is, a list of different profiles, each of which has their own cookie jar on this computer. I have them basically because I have a lot of test accounts, but this is a general feature anybody can turn on, but it's pretty hidden in Mojilla's point. We both have a hard time getting people to turn it on or use it. Mozilla's had it for even longer than we can do. My great story is I tried to get my wife to use it at home where she had one profile and I had another one, and she hated it before, just the alt-tab switching. But I found a way around that. I have 2 monitors. One monitor is one profile, one monitor is another profile, and then she just has to practice work, and that's fine. It's not a complete joke, by the way. It does work until one of the monitors comes. But so it's funny, that we have this account chooser up here, and then I wonder if I still have this or not. Yes, exactly. Well, so I have an account chooser up here, and then embedded in that, I have an account chooser in here. And, to be honest, we find that one is for choosing between humans, one is accounts for the same human. And that is what we found as the compromise between the two. At best, we can get different humans, different profiles, but the same human will not accept it. They would work for like we're having almost even getting people in the home separate, which is why in all my examples I like to show the kids picture, but also because I wish one of the things from Facebook is here. That's a significant identity provider problem where the dad goes to a site with the Facebook button and the mom and accidentally posts something to his kid's Facebook account and the kid gets logged in. People don't know it. They just click the Facebook button, and it's happening now with Google Plus and so other services. And honestly, we end up getting complaints about it, so they don't complain too much.
I wanted to recognize the tremendous amount of effort Eric has put in on this thing last 6 months. I think more than anything else, Eric has been constantly devising and working hard to get all the features in, sorted out. Actually, more than 6 months ago, I think every time I was forgetting of CDS, and Eric said, hey, how about working on CDS? We have made so much progress on this, so thank you. I think this is one of the biggest.
Cool. Funny enough, the history of that it was 2 IIWs ago in Pittsburgh, basically 2 years. If you went back and looked at my 912 notes of research, was the first time there was discussion of having a central domain that would keep a list of accounts as opposed to a browser.
That's why I started actually.
It stands for Central Discovery Service.
Yeah, that's the Discovery Service, but I started calling it Smart Account Chooser because it's account chooser is more.
Hopefully everyone will forget the term CDS soon. Just the account chooser. So these things take a couple of years. Cool. All right, well, I appreciate people's time. If anyone wants to stay around and tackle anything, that is fine. Google, everybody appreciates staying because we might have some other topics and stuff. But otherwise, feel free if you want to grab more drinks or snacks. And if anybody needs help getting out, let us know. It's basically just down those stairs, out over there, and then there's the big people parking cars. But, Amy, Greg, Ellen, thanks for coming. And George, any last comments from your side? Otherwise, I think we're going to drop off the VC.
All right, nope, no comments from my side. Thank you very much. This has been great.
All right, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.